time being what it is, I thought you and I can get together and read a little bit of this work here. And I'm going to turn off this camera just so I know which one I'm talking into. And if I get a chance at the end of this to test the music thing with you, that's great. But otherwise, I understand perfectly because it's later there. So, I
It
mean, the
is.
first thing to do, I think, would be to talk a little bit about like what do we already know about this guy, and what do we already know about the Fabians and the progressive movement. Okay, so I'll just put that
Why
out there
you and I
for
hate
you.
him so much, you mean?
Well, I know I do. I hate them. I really
Yes,
hate
I
them.
do too. I really do.
But I want to make sure that we're on the same page as to what we know about them. So what first off, what do you know about Wells? I mean, I know that I came at him as the generally just science fiction-y writer, guy.
Yeah. So what I've known about Wells, of course, has increased tremendously, especially since you recently sent me um his book, The Open Conspiracy, which I've been reading. I haven't finished it yet, but
Oh, okay.
I knew him originally as a science fiction person. I knew him as a socialist, very much interested in reforming the world, who eventually killed himself when he was despairing over the way the world had actually gone. I know that he was very much a proponent of the eugenics movement and thought that this was a good thing for the improvement of humanity to make it so. So, um, whereas I've always liked his science fiction, I do actually like The Time Machine and The War of the Worlds as books, his version, not the movie versions. Um, I do find that he is dark and a little bit twisted, even in those stories.
Hmm.
So, um,
Yeah, let me pause you for a minute to comment on that.
good.
Dark and twisted. I agree with you. He's dark and twisted in the sense that his works are entirely unprovidential. There's no sense of providence in his works at all. So I take, for instance, the Time Machine. The Time Machine's really interesting, and that is Wells. I just want to make sure that I'm getting the right author.
Yeah. We're
Okay.
talking H.G. Wells, right?
Yes, right, exactly. And
I
the,
mean,
and
not
the
Orson Welles.
Elox, Eloy, and the Morlocks, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating story, but there's no like sense in there that somehow human beings will just be human beings and enjoy beer and good talk and associating with each other. It's that they're going to split into these two groups of these very elite, effete people and these very dark, grubby people that do most of the work. It's just very like there's no providence involved at all in it. And I think that's true with almost all of his works. So yeah, dark.
That dark vision. I was actually commenting on this to somebody else because of both the massive hurricane damage in North Carolina and these recent
Ah,
horrible wildfires out in California.
ah,
That so often we see artistically, it's depicted that a catastrophe happens in America, and all of a sudden, all the people turn towards survivalism and cannibalism. This is what they show in these stories.
right,
But
right.
the reality of what people have actually done every time is not that prediction, which
Right.
I'm bringing it up because it was Wells's prediction that this would be. What really happens is people band together, help each other out through the terrible times,
Yeah.
the terrible and undeserved catastrophe that has befallen
Yes.
them.
And
They
what's
band
interesting about
together to
that,
survive. That's
what's
the
interesting,
reality.
what's interesting about that is that that's an historical precedent. You look back at history and that happens over and over. Yeah, sure, there have been horrible people that have done horrible things to each other. And sure, there have been times of great stress when humans were driven to do certain things. And to be admitted, there are certain groups of people that, ate their neighbors or whatever it is.
Some civilizations were inferior to others.
But
Yes.
generally speaking, humans do seem to have to bond together. Even pre-Christian, we seem to have
Yeah.
done that. Yeah.
There's like from 20,000 years ago, fossil of someone whose bone had been broken and knitted. Somebody else knitted that bone for this
Yep.
person. And I
Yep.
believe that's been quipped as the first mark of civilization happening.
Very interesting.
That someone saved a person who was helpless.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and so okay, so
Wells does not think that though.
no, no, he seems to think that our progress, if there is any progress as humans, is towards absolute disaster. And really, you see that a lot in the War of the Worlds, which is one of his more famous ones, where human beings are just annihilated by the aliens that come. There is no, and he set a precedent, I gotta say, for future science fiction-y works where the aliens have no compunction about annihilating this inferior species of humans. And I hate that precedent. I really do. I saw that recently in a movie called Life. Maybe it was about a year ago. I saw this movie called Life, where this conscious or sentient being came onto the ship and it just devoured the people. Had no problem about it. It mutated very quickly and all this. It just I was just disturbed by this principle. Like if you have conscious beings who think and who talk and who create artwork, you'd have something much more like the Chanur, Chanur novels, where the pride that
Very
they
good
stick
search.
together and they associated with other conscious beings and interacted with them. Yeah, they have their own culture, but a conscious being would look at other conscious beings and say that needs to be protected, or that needs to be worked with.
At Wells's time, he and other people often said, well, if we met inferior beings, it would be like us meeting the ants when we would just crush them.
Yeah.
Um, the thing is that at that particular point in time, too, I mean, nobody thought that anything except humans had any kind of intellect, reasoning capacity, virtue, anything like that. The
Yes.
thing is that I've seen is the more we have discovered about the world that is not human and found that it does have capacity for this, the more we have respected it.
Yes, and come to realize that other animal groups, even on this planet, might have a greater perspective of the world even than humans, strangely enough. Um, that there are some creatures that might, I won't say more intelligent because our standard is a human standard,
Yeah.
but they're more clever, you could say, like octopus, that kind of thing. So, but here's something which really is it's something I'm grappling with and have grappled with for several years about every piece of artwork. The artwork is in some ways you can't understand it unless you understand the time frame in which it's written, and unless you understand what was actually floating around in the air at the time. And I think that Wells was writing during a time period where there had been, oh, I don't know, 200 years of cutting off from this old tradition of living with the world rather than living on top of the world. The medievals, for instance, seem to have recognized that other animals were to be respected. Whether they thought of them as conscious or sentient, I don't really know, but they do seem to have certainly thought of them as something to be respected and looked out for. And you certainly see in some cultures, like the Celts, where they suggest that these other animals are actually more in touch with the divine and more in touch with the spirit world than humans are. That was all lost.
Also true with, I mean, again, other people that were in touch with this, the Native American Indians, who, when they would hunt, I mean, of course, you're going to kill the animal and you're going to eat it, but you still have a huge kind of respect for it as you do.
Yep.
Was that they would often refer to it as brother deer.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep. Yep.
it has to be hunted and killed because
Yep.
that's the truth. Wells doesn't agree with that, nor do any of these people that had given in to the Fabian socialist idea that it's
Yeah.
every man is a dog fighting for himself, is what they all seem to have thought.
Yep. The sort of Jack London image of the world. So are we, Jack London has a similar business, and I take
Yeah,
his
actually, I
nefarious
hadn't really put
degrees.
two and two together about that, but
Yeah. Yeah. He's
I like Jack London's stories a lot. I really do.
ditto too. Like I
Great.
like H.G. Wells.
Yeah, he's an excellent author.
Yeah. Um, so what was floating around at the time, just for clarity's sake, was on the one hand the Enlightenment movement that had occurred back at the end of the 16s, early 1700s, and it really come to fruition in the late 1700s in the Industrial Revolution and the creation of sort of a modern man, if you will. And he was being influenced by the thinkers who wanted to do politics according to reason alone. He was influenced by all those thinkers that had been part of that revolution in Germany in the 1840s, Karl Marx and the others. Because we think of Karl Marx as acting alone, he didn't. There were a lot of guys that were thinking about this, like we have to do rational, thought to create government, and we have to do it in a way of remaking society, kind of unlike the American founding, where they say it's rational, but it's based on a rational God, and we can't break certain laws. Marx and others were like, no, we break them all because they're made by us. It's totally our own creation, so it's totally our own destruction. But we just have to do it correctly, and the experts have to do it correctly. So
God, there's a phrase that's become bitter these last couple of years. The experts.
the experts have to do it. Yes, trust the experts. Well, okay, so then if that's the case, we have here H.G. Wells, who is a a strain of the communist socialist business. Okay. And he is a specific strain of the Fabians. And you might know more about the Fabians than I do. I don't really know.
I doubt it, but I do know a good deal about them.
Okay. Okay. Who were the Fabians? Where did they originate? Why that name? And what did they intend?
Um, isn't it Jeremy Bentham that started the Fabian movement? And I believe that since the society still exists, his mummified corpse is kept in a glass coffin that still presides over their meetings to this day. I don't know why they chose the Fabians, because of course Fabian refers to a particular Roman general who um, practiced a kind of guerrilla warfare in order to make sure that Rome didn't lose in one of the Punic Wars that they had. I don't know why they chose that name, but their idea was that they did have to um, tear down society as it existed and create it in such a way um, that the new society was going to be controlled by the people that were wiser and better than everyone else, who would then mete out equally to everyone as they needed it, whatever they did need, which they may have thought was a very original idea. But I actually see that as almost exactly the same thing that was in Persia 2,000 years before with the satraps.
Say
Um,
more.
Speak up on that point.
Say more. Yeah.
Okay. God, I feel like people asking me, what do you think about the Roman Empire? Well, let's go before the Roman Empire right here, and I think about it all the
What do
time.
you think about the Roman Empire every day, Ben?
Yes, several times per day. Now let's go back before the Roman Empire. We often see with Persia the great conflict with Sparta, and Sparta often gets romanticized as this nice place. It wasn't. It was a hellhole of slavery and bitter cruelty between people.
And filth.
A filth, it was. Disgusting people. Their food was awful. Their society was awful. Contrasted against that are the Persians, who, quite interesting, this is going to sound like I'm praising them. The Persians were a kind society, which seems to give out tremendous justice. Cyrus, the Persian, is recorded in the Bible, I believe accurately, as someone that ended the cruelty of the capture of the Israelites and gave
Yep.
them back justice as he did all the other people.
Yep.
All that part is true. And the conflict against Persia and Sparta, if you had looked at it just at the time, you would have said the Persians are so much more morally superior to the Spartans. They are, except in one way that is the important way, and it's the reason that the Fabian model is an awful model. The justice of the Persian society relied upon the rulers, the satraps of Persia, themselves all actually being competent, being good, being noble enough to set aside all of their talent and their skill in service towards the rest of mankind. And when that actually happens, it is wonderful. I believe Aristotle
But,
talked about politics, says monarchy is great
but,
when it's done like that.
yes. But,
But humans aren't built like that.
no.
We help each other out, sure. But when we get power, the temptation towards becoming the monster is overwhelming. Everyone falls
Yeah.
sooner or later with the power. And then that system, the satrap system, the remake society so that those who are noblest and best are at the top meeting everything out, it becomes monstrous.
See, it's a really interesting analogy, Benjamin, because I think you're absolutely correct. I think that the satraps of Persia, it worked pretty well when they all were initially sticking to their Zoroastrian origins, because Zoroastrianism proclaimed that there was a divine fire in every human being, and therefore things like slavery and abuse of your fellow humans and exploiting them, all that stuff was evil, according to the Zoroastrians. But once you move away from that initial thing, the structure itself becomes a liability because the people that were in charge had absolute rule or absolute power, and there was no ability to redress grievances at all in that civilization. So yeah, you're right. They were definitely responsible for freeing the Jews, and they're definitely responsible for liberating several of those Greek cities that held slaves. They had a great postal system, they had
Yes.
great wealth. But yes,
But the Spartans in the end did stand for a kind of freedom from that,
yeah,
from trusting the experts always.
right, right,
And
right.
as heinous as Sparta was, on that one moral choice, it was right.
Yeah, and I think the parallel also stands because when you have people that are fired by a religious zeal to remake the world, which is what the Zoroastrians really had, you run into some serious problems when you come against that really nasty grizzle of free will, where somebody says, "I don't really want to be remade. I don't really want to be
I don't want to be
eugenicized.
improved.
I don't want to be improved." And human beings have to have the freedom to be able to say that and live their lives in an unimproved way, because otherwise they just become ground into the whole machinery, the whole bureaucracy. And if I'm not mistaken, Persia had a bureaucracy which also became top heavy eventually,
Yeah,
in much the way that we're seeing now in a Fabian controlled society.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, yes, it started
So
out well, as did our current society that's having this same difficulty right now,
yes, right, exactly.
of some
So
very wealthy people who have created this structure. And I'm glad you used that term earlier. It's the structure that keeps the power concentrated, telling everyone else what to do.
mhm,
That is a
mhm.
problem,
Yes, it is. It's
because you can
definitely.
change the people out and put good people there at first. The structure dictates they will not remain so.
Yeah, and that was definitely seen by people like Kafka. For instance, the more that the older I get, the more I understand Kafka. And what he was talking about, because he was definitely looking at what had happened in Germany into that bureaucracy and saying this is bad. It's bad. It's comical, but it's dark comical. It's like laughing at the fact. It's like laughing at the fact that your entire city is burning and you have no water in your fire hydrants because it's all been used to preserve a smelt.
Yeah, there's a better joke for you
Which is
right now,
funny.
isn't it?
I mean, that's you've got to
It's
admit
funny
that's
in a truly awful kind
it's
of
funny
way.
in a really
Yeah.
dark way. It's like a Monty Python skit or something. So
That who
Kafka was
could
definitely those things.
possibly have been stupid enough to do that? Oh,
I
them.
know, like we our entire city is burning, but we saved the smelt.
I feel guilty about laughing at that, but yes, yes,
Well,
that's what Kafka saw about Germany. But of course,
right.
that's
So
Germany that had already been taken over by this idea that the Fabians had begun promulgating
oh yeah,
from Britain.
oh
And of
yeah,
course, that idea, it spread into America. They built a number of the cities here in America.
yeah. Okay, so there's the question, right? Fabians began in Britain. Wells was British,
Sure.
right? But that concept had already spread, as you said, to places like Germany and to places like America by the what? We're talking the mid to late 19th century, roughly.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, because
The
1848, we're
colonies
talking
that
this.
they built in Indiana were built in the 1800s.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, let me share what I found. I just looked up real quick on the Googles, and so I found something. And this is just a basic rundown of some various factual things. The Fabian Society itself, British socialist organization. For anybody that's unclear about this, because I actually got some people, I got some people saying, when I did the read through of Edward Bellamy, they said, "Oh, he's not socialist. You have a misunderstanding of socialism."
Fabian.
Like, God, he's socialist. He even proclaims it. But anyway, whatever. He was a Fabian. And
But he
he's like,
wasn't a real socialist, Will.
yeah, 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 yeah. Right. Yeah, I know. It's like communism, right? You just, It's been ruinous in every situation. We just got to keep doing it until we get it right. Um, no, but Fabian, socialist. So there are these different branches of communism, and really, communism has become a sort of monolithic term because it really is it's a catch-all for this idea that we can fix or improve society through bureaucratic means, and that bureaucratic means or that cause can get us to a utopia on Earth. That's essentially what communism is. Whether it's Fabian communism or socialism, or I just learned the term Lassallean communism, which I didn't really know about
I've
until
not
actually
actually
this
heard of
morning.
Lassallean communism. I'll have to
How's
learn.
that? What's that?
I've never heard of Lassallean communism before, so I'll have to learn about
It's the
that one.
first time. I'm learning this as I go. A lot of this, by the way, and I'm pretty sure you listened to him. Dr. James Lindsay has done so much great legwork on this. I really admire the guy like crazy. He's done a lot of legwork, and he makes these distinctions between the different branches of whatever this thing is. We got to call it something, so call it communism. The branch of Marxist communism is different from Fabian communism. It's different from Lenin communism. It's different from the communism that was purported by what's that Italian guy?
I don't
I
know.
suddenly lost his name. Anyway, that branch of communism.
Garibaldi.
No, 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 no. I mean, Garibaldi.
Garibaldi's well, then Garibaldi's
He
communism
he
deserves a
was a
death
commie too, but no,
rate.
much later under Il Duce. He's put in prison by Il Duce, and and he croaked
Okay.
there by tuberculosis.
Yeah, I
So
should remember
like
his name,
all
but I'm
these
blanking
different.
on it too.
Sorry, what?
I said, yeah, I should know his name too, because I can see
It'll
it's
come to me. It'll come to
I
me.
can't
I'm
remember.
55 and I've got gaps here and there, where things like spark out and like the synapses don't fire. They're like, F you, I'm not going to fire you, motherfucker. So I was like, come on. Anyway, so if I understand it right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but James Lindsay points the different strands out, and I followed him for the most part. So I'll see if I can't recall this. Marxist communism believes that the transition to the communist utopia is going to happen naturally, but it's going to happen through the stage of capitalism. So that naturally we move to capitalism, and it's a transitory stage until we get through violent means that will also happen naturally to the utopia, which is communism, and that's where everybody shares everything. That's Marxist theory.
A very good summary. That is what Marx means. Yes.
Fabians seem to believe that that movement to that utopia would not occur unless the experts prompted the people to adopt the principles of communism, essentially. In other
Prompted
words,
or forced.
sorry?
Prompted or forced, because I believe the Fabians ultimately meant it had to be imposed.
Let's say coerced.
Okay, coerced the people.
Gramsci.
Gave them an iron-handed suggestion.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I ran into suggestion like that. Voluntold, right? So the idea was that you coerce the people through both the iron fist and also through the bread and circuses to adopt the principles that are best for them, so that you can move towards a communist utopia. That's the Fabian society. Lenin then comes along and he says the only way to reach the perfect society is through violence. We have to force violence. We can't coerce people. We can't wait for them to make up their minds. It has to be violent. And so he was all for violent overthrow. And of course, then there's Stalin, and Stalin was just a thug. But then you had this guy, Gramsci.
I do want to make sure that we put something in about Leninism, because one of the things that he did think was that it didn't just have to be violent. It meant that you had to exterminate the opposition. More than
Good
just
to know.
violence, destroy everything else.
Good to know.
So,
Wow. Boy, that's tough, because when do you stop seeing the opposition? Right?
well,
I mean, that's probably why. That's
the
probably,
opposition is not human because they oppose this historical, inevitable thing. Therefore, they cannot be human.
yeah, they are not the people, right? We are the people. They are not the people.
Yeah.
That's probably that's fucking tribal.
It
Gosh.
chills your blood when you realize that he really did mean that.
So chills your blood when you find out what Stalin did, taking that principle and putting it into practice,
Yes.
right? If a man gives you a problem, no man, no problem.
Yes. Yeah.
Therefore,
Stalin
things
was
like that.
terrifying in that way because he was so cheerful about it too.
Oh yeah, yeah. And then nice snappy names cropped up like Holodomor. So then you get this guy Gramsci, who was the Italian I couldn't remember a minute ago, and he was disliked tremendously by the fascists who put him in jail, Mussolini, and therefore was held up as a hero because he was contra the fascists, and fascists are bad. I'll get to that in a minute. So Gramsci proposed that the way to coerce people is to seize all the major institutions of society, churches, entertainment, government, libraries, schools, all of them had to be seized by socialists, so they became factories for socialist thought. And his proposals wafted over to America very quickly, partly because I think his stuff was translated in the 1950s by a certain guy by the name of Buttigieg, who had a son who became mayor of South Bend later on.
Yes. I've heard of this person. By
Yeah.
the way, I do have to ask you a question about Gramsci, and because H.G. Wells in The Open Conspiracy is saying very similar things, but is Gramsci saying that it had to be seized and forced, and Wells that it had to be infiltrated and done? Or
I
were
think
they actually saying exactly the same thing as each
I
other?
think they're saying the same thing. I'll have to see because honestly, when we get to it, I haven't read it.
Oh, you
It's
haven't read
cold
it?
for me. Nope,
Oh,
it's cold for me, and that's why it's exciting. That's why it's
it
exciting.
will
I'm
make
like,
your blood run
oh,
cold, William. It will
I'm like,
make your blood run cold.
I'm excited. I'm like,
Because
woohoo! I get to
he
read this piece of
uses
shit.
all the terms that you would completely agree with, but he doesn't mean the same thing by them. That you
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
hang on a
Well,
second. Can I pull up a passage and just show you what I'm talking about? Or do you want me to wait?
yeah, please. I'll stop sharing and you share.
All
Okay.
right. This is just out of chapter 4, The Revolution in Education. Um
Actually, let me do this. I'll share it because I have it online.
okay. Pull up chapter 4 to the very, very close of chapter 4. Okay, there it is. There it is. Right there. Before we can talk politics, finance, business, or morals, we must see that we have got the right mental habits and the right foundation of realized facts. There's nothing much to be done with our lives until we have seen to that.
Mm.
It's true. Except, what do you mean by the right mental habits? And as you go through the rest of the book, you see that what he means by the right mental habits is an awful thing, a really frighteningly evil thing.
Wow.
So enjoy the book when you're reading it.
I'm looking forward to it. I really am. I mean, seriously. I'm looking forward to reading with you and finding out, what do you have to say about it? Because it's really, wow,
Yeah,
it's
wow.
something else.
Sorry, I didn't
So,
mean to interrupt. Well, I guess I did mean to interrupt you, but please go back to what you were saying before. Gramsci was translated, and these two
yeah.
go towards it.
Okay. So Gramsci, Gramsci was translated in the 50s, I believe, by Buttigieg. And that led into a whole study of Gramsci in the academic world, leading to, in the academic world, Herman Marcuse. Marcuse was the one who then, if I understand it right, really made the academic argument for this whole seizing of the things and the I don't want to say corruption, the coercion of young people especially who had to be coerced because they're the next generation. The old generation is done with, but the young people, as young as 4 or 5 years old, have to be indoctrinated early. That's kind of Mercuso's idea, and he was the one who, if I understand this right too, he began to tear apart meaning in literature because he held that you can't have the old meaning anymore. The new meaning has to be given to people, and so you have to first show that there's no meaning in anything, and so you tear apart literature, and led to a whole group of people. I forget the name of the folks. Deconstructionism.
Yes.
Deconstructionism.
Which I'm just going to tell you again, you're going to see this directly in Wells. He says that that has to be done.
Ah, okay, okay, okay.
He says the old must be taken apart in order to
Yes,
make people fit for the new world.
yes.
Right now, our education is leaving people such that they are educated, but then do not know how to survive in the modern age.
Well, okay.
Again, true, but what do you mean?
True. Wow. Okay. So, all right. So that's, and again, when I do publish this, if anybody's watching this, I mean, I really encourage anybody listening to go and check out Dr. James Lindsay's work on this, because he's absolutely phenomenal. And his writing of the queering of the American child is fantastic. He makes a really interesting distinction that queer is very different from homosexual, that homosexual is this tendency that some people have for the same sex and desire for the same sex. Queer is something more like an aberration and undermining of traditional values of what it means to be human. And it's a radically different way of looking at things. But the queer movement co-opted the homosexual movement and took it over. So that's what we're seeing now. Anyway, strongly encouraged to go see. But to go back to what I was saying about the elements that we're dealing with here, the Fabian Society, you know, we were a little bit questioning of where this came from. It's founded, it says here, in 1884, which is interesting because Bellamy wrote in 1883, if I'm not mistaken. And in the text I just started reading, which is the formation of socialism in America, it says that Bellamy was really responsible for the formation of nationalism in America.
National socialism, you mean?
Do you hear that?
No, I don't actually.
It's my daughter playing Interstellar, the music of Interstellar on the piano upstairs. Kind of wild.
Great soundtrack, and I'm glad she's playing it.
So anyway, yeah, Bellamy is responsible for forming nationalism, not National Socialism. That's German, that's later, but nationalism in America. You know, I pledge allegiance to the flag and all that stuff.
Oh, yes.
That's part of the national movement. And it was Bellamy's writings that really prompted it.
It's funny because for years when people were saying the Pledge of Allegiance was racist and so forth, I thought that's ridiculous. Why are you saying that? And then the more I learned about first Edward Bellamy and then Francis Bellamy, who wrote the Pledge,
Francis, yeah.
I was like, I mean, they were first cousins and they grew up together. They did everything together. But
well, this is gonna be.
I found out about it. I was like, okay, maybe it's plausible given that it was this guy.
No, I know. There are a lot of things that have become much more plausible in my imagination in the last few years than I ever thought possible. Yorick, but yeah, there are. This is going to sound strange, so I'm going to say this with a huge grain of salt. I really hate the progressives, and I hate communism, and I hate a lot of the characters in there. But even awful movements in human history can produce good things. You know, it's hard to say you throw everything out because this thing is so radically tainted. I'll give a classic example, and it sounds silly. The National Socialists of Germany, which we refer to as the Nazis, horrible, terrible movement. You know, there's nothing you can say that's really great about it, but
No.
they had a really good fashion designer in Hugo Boss.
All right, they had an excellent fashion designer, and the
I know
photographer of the Third Reich was a very, very gifted
they're very snappy, really snappy uniforms, you know. But more to the point, the design of Germania, which was the city that was going to be built there. I think originally it was designed to be built actually when what was the Soviet Union, once they took it over and divided it into satraps for the SS. Germania was an amazing design, and the architect who designed it, he really brought the classical movement, classical world architecture into the modern era in many ways. So his designs are quite amazing. One could even say that the German Nazi socialist movement was responsible for cleaning up a great deal of the difficulties that were happening in Germany. Right? They did. It's true. Now, how they did it was horrible, right?
Injustice before they came along.
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
There was a great deal of injustice and misery before they came along.
Yes.
But I'm just going to say, just as a commentary, please go on with what you're saying, but just as a quick comment, there's a lot of people that in this course of history who have come along and found real problems. And then the solutions they have brought to those problems have been either really stupid or else just really evil.
Yep, especially when they're final solutions, right?
Oh yeah, you are full of humor tonight, aren't you?
So, Our Fabian society was a society that was formed with great intentions and, beautiful high ideals. 1884, right? We're just after Edward Bellamy's book. I don't think it's a coincidence. It says here, members of the Fabian Society have included political leaders from other countries, such as Jawaharlal Nehru, who adopted Fabian principles as part of their own political ideologies. I don't know anything about these people. You know, the Indian.
Nehru from India.
Nehru was the Indian statesman, but I don't know
Yeah.
anything about these other political leaders adopting this stuff. But that's really interesting that they had influence on other countries, right? And it was founded in the London School of Economics. It founded the London School of Economics in 1895. So we're talking right at the end of the 19th century, Fabian Society. And today it's primarily a think tank, right? Yeah. Yeah, they come up with great ideas in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and in Sicily. And so one has to ask, does that think tank ever go away, or does that think tank now morph and grow like Akira to become this gigantic thing that wants to be sort of like a Davos creature, you know? I tend to think that the whole Davos movement and the whole, shall we say, new W order, you know, that it's sort of like it's like a blown up size of the Fabians.
Like, yeah. That
Just
it more
speculation.
cancer.
And you
Well,
could say cancer, but cancer kills the patient. This doesn't kill the patient. It just lops off pieces of it in order to improve the thing, right?
I think it
Sorry,
kills the patient.
that's humor again.
Oh,
It's
sorry.
like in the game Deus Ex, right? If you ever played
But
Deus
you're
Ex, I
talking
highly
to a guy
recommend
that
Deus
actually
Ex.
was going through cancer. I'm not really a big fan of it, you
Yeah,
know.
I know. You can't really say good things about cancer, can you?
No,
Um,
I can't say that it was a positive
yeah,
experience.
no, yeah. But it's like in the game Deus Ex, okay?
Yes.
You
Yeah,
replace pieces of the society with better working parts that are stronger and faster and more durable and lasting, and you place a leg here, an arm there, another arm, another leg, a heart, a kidney, a liver, a lungs, a guts, a butt, you know, and eventually you get to, and a brain, and eventually you get to the point like, okay, what, this is the Theseus ship problem. At what point is it still Theseus's ship if you've replaced every piece of wood? If you replaced every part of the human body with mechanical things, right? It's faster, stronger, longer lasting, but is it still the same person? And that's kind of the parallel is to society.
yes.
If you're replacing all these different things in order to make them better and better and better, at what point is it still human society? But that's the question, I suppose, to keep on the rack. The Fabians.
And
And why are they called the
that's
Fabians?
the end for the socialist movement. If it is going to improve our human society by changing or destroying everything, is there a point at which it ceases to be a human society?
Exactly.
The point
Exactly.
that
That's
people will
exactly my
help each
question.
other out when the crisis comes. When does that stop?
Yes. Right. When we get to the point where we know that rats are going to be put in a cage in front of our face. Do you know the reference?
No, tell me on this.
1984. The thing that finally breaks the
Oh
main character
yeah,
in
okay,
1984
yeah, I
is the
remember that.
rats.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. How many fingers am I holding up, Winston? 4, right? Because the party says so. No, and honestly, I asked Dr. James Lindsay about what was the problem with communism, and I liked his answer. His answer, I think he was answering me, but his answer was, I'm hubristic enough to think he was answering me. His answer is that communism can never admit it's wrong. Now, I think that's a very good answer, but I tend to think that there's something more to it. I think that it's because communism wants to fix the human person without recognizing the human person is made in the image and likeness of God with free will. In other words, it's like addressing the human person as a machine, and you fix the machine in the same way you fix a tractor or a Peterbilt, you know?
funny you bring up those exact terms right now because in my job I work with robotic machines quite a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I want to get them to do the various research tasks I want to do. One of the most annoying things for me is that when the robot, for either programming or mechanical reason, can't do what I'm trying to tell it to do or won't do it, it also won't acknowledge that it's not doing it either, and it keeps trying to do something wrong. I had one which was supposed to just slide its arm, pick up a piece, and move it over here to set it down, but it kept hitting something about halfway in between, and then dropping these incredibly valuable samples straight onto the ground where they would break
Oh,
instead.
wow. No, you
No,
can't
no, no,
have
the
that.
machine thought it was doing it right in a society that has become not human, but the machine.
It's interesting. It reminds me of that
Do
airplane that
that.
went down over the Atlantic. Remember that? Where all the dials said that it was flying at such and such a level, but really it was like flying at a much lower level because all the dials were
I actually
screwed.
don't remember when this one happened. I
I
don't.
forget when it was, but it just reminds me of that because the machine thinks it's doing what's right or what's good. And really, it's crashing the plane into the Atlantic.
Well,
Well,
that's
yeah,
what we're saying about society is beware. Your point at which your highly efficient society is actually a machine, because when it screws up, it will just smash things on the ground and throw
yeah,
airplanes into the sea
yeah,
without thinking twice about it.
yeah. And it won't care when you turn into a cockroach suddenly and have to take a day off from work. It's one of those things.
Yeah.
So here's the Fabian Society, founded 1884. The plaque is at 17 Osnaburg Street. If you ever wanted to visit, I'm assuming that's in London. Yep. So anyway, and we asked, what was it founded? Oh, there's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Oh my gosh, look at
What a
this!
weird image, wolf in sheep's clothing.
The wolf in sheep's clothing, the original coat of arms of the Fabian Society.
They dropped that coat, by the way. I wonder why.
That's breathtaking, isn't it?
You didn't know that. You didn't know that was their
I didn't know.
original.
No, I didn't know. I'm
Yeah.
learning all kinds of stuff tonight, Benjamin.
Yeah, the
That's why
Fabian
it's so exciting.
Society's original image was this particular one because their idea was that they were going to pretend to be the normal, helpful group in society, but they
Oh,
were really going to take it, devour it, and remake it. But they dropped that coat of arms because it was alarming to people that looked twice at it.
yeah.
I can see
I,
why.
I can't see why. I don't know why it'd be alarming. Why
Yeah,
would it be alarming?
because you don't want to be eaten by the wolf. Maybe we don't want to be improved.
They got nasty, sharp, pointy teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like all these pictures that are coming up on the internet right now of that Gavin or Folsom over there in California. I don't know if you've seen these, but people are wonderful how they make fun of stuff that needs to be made fun of. And you see Gavin Folsom with the human skin stretched over an obvious lizard body.
I haven't seen those pictures.
Oh,
I
oh, I
have seen
love
that
it.
in these last couple of days, his hair
Oh,
has been as perfect as usual.
yeah, it's been an awful 3 days, especially for people in California. My heart goes out to them. So
They
anyway,
did
a
not
lot of
deserve
this.
that to happen. They didn't deserve it.
No, they didn't. But a lot of what happened, I would suspect, can be traced back to this Fabian Society bullshit that they're doing. So we asked why was it named this? The Fabian Society was named after Fabius the Delayer at the suggestion of Frank Podmore, this bloke with the hairy face. So I looked it up. Quintus Fabius the Delayer. Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus, surnamed Cunctator. That fits, right?
Hmm.
He was the Cunctator. He was a Roman statesman and general of the 3rd century BC, consul 5 times, appointed dictator in 221. Whoops, 221. His agnomen cunctator, usually translated as the delayer, refers to the strategy he employed against Hannibal's forces during the Second Punic War. Facing an outstanding commander with superior numbers, he pursued a then novel strategy of targeting the enemy's supply lines and accepting only smaller engagements on favorable ground, rather than risking his entire army on direct confrontation with Hannibal himself. As a result, he is regarded as the originator of many tactics used in guerrilla warfare.
So the Fabian Society is after guerrilla tactics against the rest of society. And by
Yep.
the way, it does a great disservice to Fabius Maximus, who actually was a very admirable man in so many ways, to have named their society after him.
Yeah.
So
But if anybody was in any doubt that we're at war,
yeah,
well, you may not be at war, but they are at war.
they're at war, and it only takes one party to start a war.
That's right. You think it takes two to tango, but you're wrong.
Well, it took one.
Yeah, these guys are tangoing all over the place, from Hawaii to California to Ohio.
Or to here in North Carolina, where as of today, in the middle of a winter storm, they're throwing poor people out of the homes that they have been kept in since the Great Hurricane, without letting them go back to their own homes. Literally
Oh,
thrown
that'll work.
out on the street to be homeless. That's
You know, it's
actually
almost
happening today, right now.
it's almost like somebody wants a lot of people just to die.
Yes, that's what a lot of people here are saying. Yeah.
Yeah, because
I
when you
wish
have a
I could
small,
laugh about it, but it's too bitter to
oh,
me right now. I
Benjamin,
mean,
don't get me wrong, it's
seriously, this is
absolutely
like
horrible.
30 miles west of me. This is what's happening.
It's horrible. It's real people being affected in a real way by these sons of bitches. And I only laugh because I find it so darkly comic that
Yeah,
human beings would do this sort of thing. But
it drives
it's
me even
like
quite a laugh.
when you read Edward Bellamy, and have you read him yet?
I've only read snatches of Bellamy. I haven't read his work. Certainly,
Okay.
you are far more the expert in him than I am.
This summer, force yourself, because I might have to go back and reread him simply because I want to know the arts of
He
the enemy.
makes
And
me feel dirty. He
I
makes me feel
realize,
dirty every time I read him.
yeah, but that's part of the, I just consider that part of the job. It's like I feel like that guy used to the TV show Dirty Jobs, man's just got to get in there and just do it. But I understand. I understand. Um, but one of the things that Bellamy points out in his book, no, one of the things that Bellamy puts forward in his book is that the population of America in his utopic future is greatly diminished. It's down to about a quarter of where it was in 1883,
Good
which gives you a sense of how
God.
few people
God.
he envisions in the future. And if that's the future for the whole Fabian society and those that have subscribed to it, we're talking massive, massive genocide to get to that point.
I believe it takes the whole population of the US down to slightly under 1 million people, the whole US.
And people will scratch their heads and say, well, how the hell are you going to do commerce? How's anything going to run?
That's
Automation,
a very
baby.
good question.
It is a very good question. You'd have to have somebody who was working on automated systems and software who believed in the Fabian society and was pushing for a future controlled by machines.
Well,
Do
I would
we have
still
somebody
ask
like
where we
that?
could do commerce since the machines don't actually have requirements that have to be fed constantly the way humans.
No, they could do it.
And
They
yes,
could do it on their own.
we do have people that are pushing for exactly that.
Of course,
Troubles me tremendously.
it troubles the hell out of me. It's very troubling. And when you look at these smiling faces of people like Bill Gates and others, you think you son of a gun, Well, I think worse things, but I'm trying very hard not to cuss
Thank
just
you
in
for
case,
keeping the language PG.
yeah, trying as best I can. So any parents out there, I'm sorry if I was salty, but um, yes, it's disturbing. But okay, back to the subject. This is where we get the idea of the Fabian Society is from this guy who is the originator of many tactics used in guerrilla warfare, right? Fabius Cunctator, Fabius the delayer. And the idea being that you delay until the opponent is exhausted and can't fight anymore, and then you attack. Okay. So you want to be a historian about it, you can go and study the tactics of Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus employed against Hannibal to see what tactics are being employed by the Fabian Society. So anyway.
Well, for anyone that wants to think about the Roman Empire, it's actually a very interesting topic to read about Fabius
Yes.
Maximus.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So here's our guy H.G. Wells. Okay, this is the bloke that we're talking about. And most people, yeah, he's a science fiction writer, but science fiction, it's just fiction, right? Fiction doesn't have any effect on human culture, right? It's just a bunch of fluff and entertainment. What do you think of that attitude?
I think that attitude is a dangerously naive attitude. The images that are put forth shape your consciousness. In fact, my sons and I were talking about this over Christmas because of the movie Alien and the effect that it had on people thinking about what outer space aliens would actually be like. Before that movie came along, they were not universally depicted as dangerous predators. After that movie, I mean, you brought up that movie Life. Life is just the intellectual descendant of Alien, which
Yep.
gave this image of there is a terrible thing waiting out there in the
Yep.
dark.
Yeah. Hostile. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you had
No, the
you
image
had
is the
some
danger. All fiction images are, I won't say dangerous. Well, they are dangerous. They're powerful.
powerful.
The more
Yes.
clear
Yes.
that image is, the more powerful it is.
Yep.
Wells wrote good stories,
He sure
powerful
did.
stories.
Yeah, he sure did. Yep, and his work is so powerful that it's repeated even now, or mimicked even now. Things like the Time Machine, for instance, or the War of the Worlds, as we said earlier. Other works of his influenced other writers. Influenced people like who wrote John Carter, Warlord of Mars, right? Or
Oh, yeah,
um,
Carter.
the the creators of those sci-fi movies during the Cold War. All those things. They all owe a great deal to Wells and to his work. Uh yeah, The Invisible Man. There's another one.
Oh, I
Island of
forgot.
Dr.
I
Moreau.
forgot he'd
Yeah.
written that one. Yes, and the Island
Yeah.
of Dr. Moreau,
Yep.
which has got
Yep.
now these days with genetic engineering, people right
Yep.
away see although that's not what's done in the book. People see it
No.
as a reality with genetic engineering now.
Yeah. Yeah, I find The Island of Dr. Moreau one of the most disturbing science fiction books I've ever read, actually. Um, it's on the one hand, it calls up this horrendous cold thing that Moreau does of altering all the beasts, and then also this strange, almost affection for the misery and the suffering that the beasts go through and trying to hold themselves to a code of ethics, almost like Wells had sympathy for the patient that was being operated on. So yeah, it's a really it's one of those books. We read some stuff in school, and I think sometimes, why do we read those books? Why do we read like Catcher in the Rye, or why do we read, for that matter, even Charles Dickens? Those are nice writers. Yeah, they're pleasant and they make you think. It's true to a certain degree. But then you look at these works that really influenced the 20th century, and I think those are the works you really want to focus on. Island of Dr. Moreau being a big one, that deeply influential book. So yeah, and The Shape of Things to Come, another big one, which hardly anybody's ever heard about.
I have not read that one.
Shape. Oh, yeah, you
Is it
should.
is it a
It's
work of fiction or is it a work of his just true description of what he
it's
felt things?
it's fiction, but it's like Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers fiction. Okay, this is interesting. Shape of Things to Come projects way into the future in the same way Bellamy does, and it makes a world that is peaceful and decent and runs well, and everybody gets along with each other, and it's really a socialist utopia. So Wells was also crafting in fiction what the socialist utopia was going to look like in the same way Bellamy does. And I'm not saying Flash Gordon and what's it, Buck Rogers do that. But what I am saying is that those writers of those comic strips and later serials and movies were looking at what H.G. Wells was doing and say, "Oh, that's an interesting idea. Let's make that, into the pleasant fiction that we have." And they wrote this kind of fluff, in much the way that Edgar Rice Burroughs, I think it was Edgar Rice Burroughs, who wrote John Carter. Basically, he looked at what was being done in Wells' works and he said, "Well, that's interesting. I can write that." And so he wrote that stuff, and that influenced society too. So the ramifications of Wells' works kind of go down the line into 20th century literature. And I find it intriguing that they were influencing people to do things that then ended up horrendous, that other people wrote fictional works about, saying, "Oh, these are horrendous things," but their fiction works don't address the problems that the problem of Wells's basic tenet. So like Aldous Huxley in 1984 and Animal Farm, they're powerful works that are critiquing the philosophy that goes into the Holodomor, for instance, and the Stalinist Russia, but they're not critiquing the ideas that were set forth that led to those things. You know what I'm saying?
Very interesting point. Yes, not
Yeah,
be asking why anyone would have thought this in the first place.
right.
Why would Pol Pot have decided that killing every person that had an education in Cambodia would actually improve society? That didn't come out of nowhere.
This is, oh my God, Pol Pot. Do you know what his profession was?
No, I actually don't. Apart,
Teacher of English literature and composition. Think about that for a minute. He was teaching English literature and composition, which meant he was educated in English literature and composition, which meant he had gone to English composition and literature schools, which meant he was reading this crap.
well, it seems to
Isn't
have.
that isn't
Yes,
that something?
really interesting. No, I had no idea that that's what his prior profession had been.
Yeah, prior,
Well, I guess
before
I
he,
should look because when I say that his ideas came out of nowhere, I guess I'd never really thought about where he came from.
right, right. And this is the thing it's beginning to dawn on my stupid beetle brain here, is that none of these ideas come out of nowhere.
Now that
They
we're on our
all are,
50s, we should acknowledge this.
yeah, they're all attributable to prior ideas. And somehow we have to address the prior ideas in order to understand how we got to this point. Because otherwise, it's just like, George Soros fell out of the sky and got the Congressional Medal of Freedom, it's that kind of thing. But no, he was educated to a certain point where he thought he was God, you know?
Which means that he had that idea reinforced by those who taught him.
Yes, exactly. Exactly, which we could say is part of the problem of this whole business is that these socialist ideas do not liberate people as much as confirm them in their narcissism.
Well,
Anyway,
that's the danger with the satrap system too, is that sooner or later you get that. And then, of
yep.
course, you can't admit that you're wrong because, as you were using terms earlier, the machine like society, and machines never say they're wrong.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
won't admit the problem once they become the machine.
yep. And you get ground in there like Kafka got ground into the German machine.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. All right. Got to move on here. Open Conspiracy, published in 1928 by H.G.Wells when he was 62 years old.
It's interesting. That's before the Nazis came on board. Okay, go
No connection, I'm sure.
ahead, said he ironically.
It was revised and expanded in 1930 with the additional subtitle, A Second Version of This Faith of a Modern Man, made more explicit and plain. In 1931, a further revised edition appeared titled, What Are We to Do with Our Lives? And a final version appeared in 1933 under its original title. Geez, he just couldn't get it right, could he? Many of its ideas are anticipated in Wells' 1926 novel, The World of William Clissold, which I've never heard of before, but there it is. So here's Wells' own words, and then we should really turn to the text. Oh, by the way, for anybody who's curious, Wells was really disliked by certain Christian authors like Hilaire Belloc, G.K. Chesterton, C.S. Lewis, and even J.R.R. Tolkien, who does write against him in his letters. So if you're thinking about how to judge things as you go along, if you're a fan of Tolkien, if you're a fan of Lewis, if you're a fan of Chesterton, if you're a fan of Belloc, probably the people that they critique are the people you say, that guy's no good. That's just throwing that out there.
And to understand why they didn't like him.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't just because he was a poor writer.
No. Chesterton goes on at some length about Wells and the entire eugenics movement too, which is an interesting thing to read about what Chesterton had to
Yes,
say
it
about
does.
that. But sorry, that's
Yes,
off
it
topic from what
does.
we're talking about here.
Belloc does too, as a matter of fact. And Belloc writes really well about this new progressive movement and how it is going to end up as Satan worship, he says.
Interesting.
That's the
The
inevitable
writing
end.
is so prophetic about what actually
Oh
happened.
my gosh. I mean, that's a whole nother ball of wax, but uh read Belloc's writing. I'm trying to remember the name of it suddenly. It has to do with the New World Order, and I'll publish that somewhere else. We should go over that one too. But anyway, the book is, in Wells' words, a scheme to thrust forward and establish a human control over the destinies of life and liberate it from its present dangers, uncertainties, and miseries. Sounds pretty good.
Well, sufficient control, all right, right? Just control nature. You can take care of all those problems.
Yep. And the dangers, uncertainties, and miseries of life are ever present because there is no God, right? And therefore, these things are ubiquitous, and the only way to survive them is by taking complete control and organizing all of the aspects of human life.
Interesting to me that there are certain words that I find are like gunpowder touch-off words with me. He's talking about control over
Oh, I
destiny.
know.
And I see back hundreds of years, back at the start of the Renaissance, when they were talking about magic, not people waving wands and wearing silly little hats. I mean, the people that were actually seriously trying to do this said that this was the control of nature by understanding it's the control of the world
Yes.
by
Yes.
understanding nature. You see
Yes.
this word again, human control over the destiny of life. And to me, this is magical thinking. And I find that very dangerous.
Yeah, very dangerous.
So
Yeah, very dangerous. I mean, that's the whole premise of Goethe's Faust, right? Cameron pointed this out, that Faust is sitting there translating um, Gospel of John, and he comes across this, in the beginning was the word, and he can't translate logos. He doesn't know how to translate it. So he translates it finally as power. In the beginning was power, right? And it's then that the devil shows up.
yes.
The
And
same, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, because I'm just still thinking about this here. He was talking about control of the world. I've seen hurricanes. I've
Yeah.
seen them scour things away
Oh
totally.
yeah. Yeah.
You can't control the world. It will overwhelm you at a certain point. There's nothing you can do. And the idea, the arrogant idea that you could control it such that you can liberate mankind from danger, uncertainty, and misery, that arrogance creates wildfires that destroy whole cities.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And you know, you see that again and again
Otherwise,
in science fiction showing up, where the experiment goes wrong and suddenly the beast escapes and eats everybody. You know, like 28 Days Later, for instance, or the
yeah,
Umbrella Corporation there, and that sort of thing. It shows up all over the place, and it's definitely hubris. You know, the ancients called it hubris. I see. You know, we binge watched the whole Harry Potter series again, and there's a lot there that I raise a quizzical eyebrow about, you know, and things I think, oh, that's inferior. But I will say, one thing that J.K. Rowling got spot on was that the evil concentrated in Mr. No-Nos was evil about trying to mitigate danger, uncertainty, and misery, because that's essentially what Voldemort is all about.
yeah,
Oh, so
I
she got that spot on.
yeah.
Well, yeah. And even, I mean, even Sauron, when we talk about Tolkien's works, even Sauron, that's what he's doing. I proposed this to Cameron. What if the depictions of Sauron and the orcs have been completely wrong, and Mordor have been completely wrong? That they're not these slime-filled, blackened, slobbering entities, but rather they are beautiful, clean, perfect lines everywhere, concrete all over the place entities. Orcs may be misshapen elves, but still elves. You know, it's having a striking beauty to them, like a Paris Hilton or something like that. Um, and that Sauron himself is trying to mitigate the danger, uncertainty, and misery of Middle Earth. I mean, maybe that's partly what Tolkien was getting at, was this attempt to do things better than the Maiar were doing, better than the elves, better than the god himself, Iluvatar. Maybe. I think there's a lot to that.
It's certainly a thought, because once you get extremely ordered lines and perfection of such things, you do get the Nazis.
Oh, yes, and they certainly did clean up the streets of Berlin, didn't they?
They did.
Yep.
Yeah, all clean.
I you know, I was looking for things to show, and I don't think I'm going to find this necessarily, but I was looking for things to show, and I was thinking about that eye, the all-seeing eye of
The Illuminati.
Masonic order, you know,
Yeah.
the Masonic order, and I think very much it's Tolkien was getting at that when he was doing his Sauron image, and there's a lot in that book that speaks to this whole progressive Fabian society BS that was infecting us all at the time. So,
You'd wanted to talk more about this particular book, and his term had set me off because it made me angry. So I interrupted you, and I apologize for that. Do you want to go back to what you were saying about it?
I don't remember what I was going to say about it. Just that I haven't read it yet, but as a scheme to thrust forward this business, it's certainly a hell of a scheme. I mean, that's all I can say, I suppose.
Okay.
So, anyway, publication date 1928, first, just before the Nazis' rise to power in the Weimar Republic. So,
Established human control over everything.
yeah,
Yes.
I don't think it's coincidence at all. And I think he was certainly influenced by Bellamy's earlier work. This is something that Bellamy
Oh, well,
societies cropped up all over Europe and all over America. People got together to try and think through how to create this new world order. They even called it that. Um, and I think
that's not a new
that's,
term.
oh, no, 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 not at
We've
all.
been saying it recently, but it is not a recent term.
No, it's been around. one thing that Lindsay points out is that these sons of guns go undercover for long periods of time. You know, they adopt a new term, they have a new way of organizing their society. They whatever, you know, they disappear. And I am of the suspicion that what the catastrophe that happened in the late 30s and 40s in Europe drove this whole society to recalibrate itself. Um, but I think that the idea of the Davos set was back here in the 1880s, maybe even earlier. I honestly do. Whatever we're calling it, communist, socialist, Fabian, Lassallean, Leninism, whatever it is,
Bilderberg group, if you want to put
Bilderberg,
that in. Yeah.
whatever it is, it's the same bloody thing. It's just got a different face because that's how they operate. So like some pudding, right? Some amorphous pudding or jelly from D&D that, you know, has a face pop up here or there, you know, that kind of thing. It's horrendous. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. All right, so here, okay. Do we have time to at least read the opening of The Open Conspiracy?
Oh, please do. I think people ought to hear that.
All right. The copy that I have in print, and I'm going to be making markings on, I got from Amazon. It's just a little print up
I have
that
it
they
too.
do.
You know about
I think
that?
it's only like $8 or $9. Like $8 or $9. It wasn't that much.
It's not a long
But
book.
I like to read things in print because I can mark them up and it's more tangible and because the world is an incarnate entity. But you have to sometimes go to this electronic thing. So here's our cheese eating author, H.G. Wells. He's obviously one of those Eloi,
Hmm.
one of the higher levels of
Noble,
society. We know that because of the bow
greater mind.
tie.
Oh, you're right. You're right. I hadn't noticed that touch, but definitely that makes him better than me.
Better than you.
And you
What do
notice
you
I'm not
got
even
on,
wearing a
buddy?
tie.
You're
I'm
not
not
wearing
even
a
wearing
tie
a
at
tie.
all.
No, no,
Yeah,
no.
no kidding. Between that and his porn stash, I mean, he is definitely the guy superior to both of us. So anyway, this is there's an introduction here, which I'm going to skip, and I'm going to go to his introduction, which is no, this is actually an introduction by somebody
You
else, looks
want,
like.
yeah, you want his introduction.
Yeah, and I think the one that I have, yeah, it's the same one here. Okay, so I just want to read what is in the introduction of the book itself. Okay. Maybe the best way to do this, Benjamin, is for each of us to take a paragraph and we just trade off.
Sure.
And if we have a thought, great. Otherwise, we just move on. I'll start us off. The Open Conspiracy was Wells' blueprint for a world revolution. He regarded this book as his finished statement on the way the world ought to be ordered. Possibly he underestimated or ignored the fact that it is often in the interest of subsets of the human race to act against other subsets. Moreover, the emphasis on religion seems odd from a rationalist. Okay, I got to just pause right there. It's
Mhm.
not odd. Lindsay points
Oh,
this out. The Marxism, Leninism, socialism is a religion, and
well,
it's and
his
it sees.
chapter on religion actually talks about that.
Okay,
You're going
okay,
to say
and
it seems, but I have a feeling you're going to predict what you haven't read yet.
well,
Exactly what's in
I
this
mean,
book.
you already said it. You already said it. He's using terms that sound familiar but actually mean something different, which is a typical Masonic thing to do. Basically, he talks about religion in the same way Marx did as the opiate of the masses. Now, that was a put down from Marx, but it was also that Marx was pointing out that religion needs to exist in order to convince people to not rebel against communism. And he was saying that that it exists in order that people not rebel against the bourgeois. We need to use it as well. It doesn't actually exist. There is no God. It's just a thing we use to keep people pacified. So whoever the author here is writing, Wells is rationalist. I don't think that's the right term.
No, it's not. And he actually is talking about how we need to reform religion in order to make people better suited for living in the modern society.
Ach, yeah.
And
Ach,
that's the
yeah.
whole thing is like how to make mankind more perfect so that it can be more useful to the society.
Yes. Yes, because that, and you see that over and over again in every religion right now. It seems like maybe not so much some like Islam, but every religion seems to talk about how religion is necessary to make you a better person, to make you more perfect. You know, the Catholic Church I know is just riddled with this crap. I call it crap because it is
Very
crap.
dangerous idea as opposed to having the religion be redemptive, which is
Yes,
very different from perfective.
yes. It's very different. Very different. It's like somehow if you say X, Y, or Z prayers, you will be holy. It doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. You can't
Eh,
buy your way. But Wells thinks you can buy your way.
Oh, I'm sure he does.
Salvation.
I'm sure he does because he is a modernist through and through.
Hmm.
And so you buy your way not into a metaphysical world of perfection or even a state of being. You buy your way into whatever passes for eternity nowadays. Legacy, for instance. Soros will be remembered.
Hmm.
I won't be remembered. Who cares?
It's funny, all these people that think they're so great, and yet it only takes a couple of generations and no one remembers them at all
Yeah,
more.
yeah, yeah.
I know history very well, and you do, so you and I would both possibly know who Otto von Metternich is.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
How many people who are going to listen to this podcast know Metternich? And yet in his
But not a
time,
lot.
he was so important.
Yeah, he was. He was extremely
How
important. Well,
quickly
yeah,
people get forgotten. Our works are eroded away so
yep.
quick.
Thank God for that.
Yes,
In my opinion.
yes.
Thank God for that.
If it's good, let somebody who's alive continue doing something good, and if it's bad, let it be forgotten.
Right. Exactly. All right, let's move on.
Right.
You take a
After
second.
the First World War, observing the lack of knowledge of most people about most things, he turned to history. Starting in 1918, his outline of history first published in parts with gorgeous covers, then in 1920 as a two-volume work including color plates of a lavish nature for the time. In effect, it was jointly authored. His chapters were sent to collaborators, and the resulting multiple corrections reassembled by the duly chastened Wells. A popular one-volume edition appeared in 1930. By the standards of its time, this was a bestseller. It was praised decades later by A.J.P. Taylor as still the best introduction to history. Toynbee had a favorable opinion of it. During the 1920s, it sparked a controversy with Hilaire Belloc, who believed in such things as the fall of man. It was also attacked by a teacher of Greek. Wells' hopes that school history could be taught in an international sense still, of course, have not come to fruition. Who wrote this introduction? I mean, seriously, this introduction is annoying. Of course they haven't come to fruition. Does the author think that these ideas are good to bring forward? Sorry. I don't think I like the person who's writing this introduction.
It's worthwhile reading because it's obviously somebody who's sort of giving an encomium for Wells. But okay, let me go back for a minute. First published in parts with gorgeous covers. That's kind of like saying, Hugo Boss is a really good designer.
Well,
Those
he writes some
snappy uniforms
really
that
good
the
photographs too. So
ah, those and Lily Riefenstahl was a very good director of movies.
yes, that is,
Come on. She says.
well, in point of fact, she was, among other
Well,
things.
no, she was. No, she was. And Hugo Boss still makes really good ties. But
Yes, yes, among other things.
the Volkswagen, very good car. So anyway, it was he got in a fight with Hilaire Belloc, and Hilaire Belloc, in my opinion, won. He's the better writer, and he has much more accurate about. He's much more pessimistic, but he's also much more accurate about what's going to happen when we adopt these principles. So read Hilaire Belloc if you haven't already. I mean, I highly recommend reading his works. I'll put a link if I can. But I love this. Hilaire Belloc, who believed in such things as the fall of man. I mean, how could you believe in that in the 20th
Wow.
century? My
We
God.
perfect people now. They're not fallen.
Yeah, my God. My God. My God. My God. Yeah, the fall of man. If you believed in the fall of man, you might be a little bit more cautious about instituting things like what Wells suggests. You know, you might think that the satrapy doesn't really work that well when you've got corrupt human beings put in place.
Possibly because you can look at what happened in the 20th century and
Yeah.
decide that maybe it can go wrong.
And not just wrong slightly. It's not just like, the trains are going to get a little
No, no,
backed
no.
up.
It wasn't a little error. No, no, no.
No, no, no. It's
All I
like
can say
40
is that we haven't actually
billion
got a
corpses.
nuclear war out of it yet.
Yeah, no, we haven't got it yet.
Yet.
Not until somebody, well, I shouldn't say this in front of the kids, but not until somebody decides that that's the best way to diminish the population a little.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I
Well,
tell you,
after we give
I,
that
and
cheerful thought, let's go on.
yeah, I think part of the reason that I laugh about this is because it's so horrendous that otherwise it's like looking at the Medusa. For me, it's like this is such horrendous crap. But
Yeah,
there it
you
is.
do have to be able to joke about it as defense against that. Sometimes, honestly, mocking things is one of the best things you can possibly do against
Yeah.
evil. Um,
Yeah, I mean, like think about this school history taught in an international sense. Like, what does that really mean? That means that a centralized source of thought is going to disseminate what should be thought to all schools throughout the world.
yes, imposed on all
Imposed.
schools.
Yes. Yes. And rather than teaching your local history in Ghana or in the steppes of Asia, or in Des Moines, you're going to be told by the world authority that you have to teach this set of history, this way of looking at history, and nothing else. You read the Lois, what is her name, Lois? The Giver, the book, The Giver.
Uh,
Have you read that book?
no, I don't think I've read this one.
Highly recommend. Highly recommend. Very, very good piece of dystopia. In The Giver, that's exactly what happens. She basically takes Bellamy's work and just cuts it into pieces. And it's a really stunning work. It's kind of like reading The Children of Men or something, by P.D.
I
James.
have read that one, yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What
It's
happens when you
really
cease to
powerful
have
stuff.
children?
I strongly recommend it. Lois, y'all don't remember who wrote The Giver? Okay. All right. Anyway, The Giver. No, you don't remember The Giver? You don't remember what again? I'll come back to it. That's fine. That's fine. Anyway.
It's not Daniel Davis.
No, 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 no. It's a woman. Okay, so um he planned and collaborated a hefty set of volumes on biology, the science of life. Hey, that's your field, with his own son and with Julian Huxley.
Oh, I know Julian Huxley.
Yeah, we'll come
Related
back
to
to him.
someone.
We'll come
Okay, sorry,
come
sorry.
back to him in a minute. The theme was largely evolutionary. The Origin of Species was published only a few years before his birth. Huxley, a descendant of T.H. Huxley, regarded Wells as something of a Cockney upstart.
Slowly.
Lewis Lowry. And what do you make of that connection to Julian Huxley, Ben?
Huxley is a horrible human being, to tell you the truth. And if he was so influenced by Huxley's thought, you're talking about somebody who really preached monstrous ideas for mankind. I didn't know he was connected to Huxley.
Hmm.
I already didn't like I mean, seriously, I like his fiction, but I don't like his world.
Yeah.
But the fact that he is personally connected towards T.H. Huxley. Remember, Huxley is talking about exterminating whole swaths of humanity in order to improve the human race. He's a little disturbing if you read him, but he was upper class. His manners were impeccable. Oh,
Was it? Yeah, I've heard that before about Julian Huxley. And wasn't he connected to
I was talking about
um,
T.H., but yeah, I'm sure Julian
well,
Huxley.
Julian, yeah, but TH as well. Julian was connected, I'm not sure, but I think he was connected to um uh, Mortimer Grant, the American eugenicist who started the movement in America. I think that he had a connection to Huxley as well. They all ran in the same circles and flew to the same conventions, uh, uh, much like a group that does the same thing now in Davos. It's a similar bunch of monkeys.
And they have been
But
doing so for quite a while.
was T.H. Huxley not only a eugenicist, was T.H. Huxley also, I may be completely off, was he also in favor of certain use of drugs, or is that, maybe I'm misremembering here?
I don't remember Huxley T.H.
Who
Huxley.
wrote the door? Who wrote the Doors of Perception?
Oh,
Who
I'm in
wrote that book?
the 50s too. Will, you're asking me to remember these things.
I know. Let me look it up. I'm gonna have Batman wallpaper. Thomas. I was right. The Doors of Perception, written by Aldous Huxley,
Aldous
who
Huxley.
also wrote Brave New World.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Doors of Perception is 54, a psychedelic experiment under the influence of mescaline in 1953, which became the basis for the rock band The Doors. That's where they get their idea. But the Doors of Perception, Huxley is we're
Totally did
hearkening
not know
back.
that. Did not know that that's where their name came from.
Yep.
Wow.
Huxley is hearkening back to a William Blake poem, where he says that when the doors of perception are cleansed, everything will be seen as it ought to be, which is infinite. So Huxley wrote The Doors of Perception after his mescaline experience, basically talking about that other world that he reached intellectually, I suppose. Yeah, here, William Blake, by the use of drugs, which is, I'm not saying that that's a bad or good thing, the reaching of that other world. I think in some ways that the ancients were very much in touch with this, and certainly they seem to have used a great deal of psychedelics. What is interesting about it is that Huxley and others were advocating a spiritual or dimensional leaving of the body, and that the body was in some ways to be left. They were denying or trying to negate the incarnational nature of the world. That's what I'm getting at, which is very, very close to what these other fellows were doing. So
I also see precisely why you're getting at it, given our earlier conversation about the machine of mankind.
look,
At what point has you left the body and are you not human anymore?
exactly, and become Deus Ex. And here's another connection. Aldous Huxley is brother to Julian Huxley.
The English eugenicist, internationalist. Secretary of the Zoological Society of London. Oh, that's very nice, actually. That's noble.
Not
There's nothing wrong
surprising.
with that group.
Not surprising. Madison Grant, along with their father, were really the progenitors of the eugenicist movement, but also of the conservation movement. What later became the group Greenpeace has its roots in what Mortimer Grant was doing back in the 1880s. He actually was deeply influential in creating the national park system in America, including Yosemite National Park and Glacier National Park. They're both his creations. He lobbied for them, he paid money to get them underway, and he influenced politicians such as Roosevelt to actually create those entities. He was really big on preserving certain species and culling them so that the best species could outlast everything else. So like the moose, preserving the moose, but only the best specimens, because that way hunters, the elite who hunted, the hunters could hunt the weaker members of the group, and the stronger members of the group could then become dominant and pass on their DNA to others, and you have a stronger group of moose or whatever it was, elk or whatever. So that was Madison Grant,
So
and shared with Huxley. You can see the eugenicist strain in that whole thought. So Wells, Huxley, Grant, all these guys were closely united to each other.
the thing. We were talking about Bellamy and the Pledge of Allegiance, and I told you how it used to be that I thought the ideas about the Pledge of Allegiance being racist were crazy until I learned more about Bellamy. And I like the words of the Pledge of Allegiance, I really do. But I can no longer unreservedly tell people that maybe they should make this.
Ditto.
I have always been an environmentalist. I've never actually thought badly about the London Zoological Society. I've always thought, well, they did good work. But I look right now, seeing it was these people who were associated with the conservation movement and various zoological societies, because I presume it's more than just that one. And it alarms me. Should I unambiguously give my support, my emotional support towards these things?
Not unambiguously.
Or is
It's a good question.
Is it tainted with them?
It's a good question. Not unambiguously, but remember I said earlier about how sometimes these really evil movements have things that emerge from them that are actually, they're good. Fiat, for instance, was completely in collusion with Mussolini until the end of the war, when they turned and allied themselves with the Allies. They produce a car that is pretty damn good.
Yes.
But They were funded by, and the runway was cleared by the fascists. So when you drive a Fiat, are you a fascist? No. If you drive a Volkswagen, are you a Nazi? No.
Yes.
No.
And do you like Mitsubishi cars?
Yeah, similar business.
Mitsubishi was a war manufacturer for
Yep.
Japan.
Didn't they create the Zeros engine?
They did. They created the Zero and several of the other
Yeah.
airplanes that the
So
Japanese used, along with their various tanks and artillery too.
yeah. So again, it's a very complicated world, kids. I hate to say it. When you start looking at the advances that have been made in cancer research, it's astounding how far we've come in cancer research, even in the last 10 years. Cancer research
But
is
do you want to look
deeply,
real closely at the contributions towards that were done by a guy called Joseph Mengele?
that's the guy
They're
I was just
truly
about to say.
innovative contributions that we still use.
And all those great
Good.
volunteers from the Jewish people who helped
No,
advance.
I'm sorry, that's just too gruesome. I'm
It is
sorry.
gruesome, Benjamin.
Gruesome. He
It's
did
gruesome
such
as shit. It's like,
horrible things and
oh,
documented them.
he,
And
don't
the
get me started. It's almost too
documentation
much to
is
talk
what
about.
led to our modern surgical techniques, and it's
But
so
this, but
easy to think about.
but again, this is the Faustian bargain, and that's why I think that play Faust by Goethe is so interesting to read. This is the Faustian bargain. The advances that we enjoy now, even down to things like indoor heating and the clothing that we wear off the rack and the food that we get at the grocery, all of them are wonderful and they've made great lives for people. But we have to acknowledge that they were made on the backs of slaves and torture victims and things like that. There's just no way around it. Our computers that we're using now are mined out of the ground by young boys in terrible conditions, getting lithium out of the ground. How do you it it's a child who wants to say everything must be pure. I think an adult has to grapple with the fact that things aren't pure. And the only way I think to really grapple with that is to say that this world is passing. The only world that's important is the next. You know, um, I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that. Just that these guys that we're dealing with here, Huxley and Wells and Grant and all these others, they were deeply intertwined with one another and they did produce some very fine things, but they also produced some really insidious stuff. So,
Yeah, I think that's what we're saying about Wells. Although the person who wrote this introduction doesn't seem to get it.
I don't know.
Why don't you go to Wells's first chapter itself, where he starts writing, and maybe people that are listening to us will hear why I'm having such a bad emotional reaction to the author's introduction here.
Ah, okay.
Right,
Okay.
right there. Can you scroll it up, and I'll start reading the first paragraph, and you scroll a little higher. The
I
present
could.
crisis in human affairs. See, again, his words are all right, but you're going to find he doesn't mean the same thing that you and I might mean. The world is undergoing immense changes. Never before have the conditions of life changed so swiftly and enormously as they have changed for mankind in the last 50 years. We have been carried along with no means of measuring the increasing swiftness in the succession of events, and we are only now beginning to realize the force and strength of the storm of change that has come upon us. See, in
Yeah.
my own way, I agree with everything he just said, except if we keep going, you'll see he doesn't mean it that way.
Well, but here's something I noticed right out of the chamber. Um, this is a manifesto, if you will, for how the religion is going to proceed in the future. It is in some ways the Bible of the Fabians. And so the opening principles are the principles that they're going to operate under.
The
The
sheep
opening
stealing.
principles, the opening principle of the Bible, the book of Christianity, there are two I cite. One is that in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness moved over the face of the waters, and the Spirit of the Lord was moving over the depths. That opening frames a way of thinking about our situation, that our situation was formless and dark and really chaotic, and that the Lord was there.
from the
And he
beginning.
was doing great things, he was doing great things. That in the midst of all this chaos, there was the Lord, and he was doing something. The whole time we might not have seen it. And so, like everything that follows from that all the way to Revelation is sort of an outcropping of this initial philosophy that in the midst of chaos at the very beginning, Hashem was there. Now, compared to this opening, because this is the Genesis 1:1 of the Fabians. Crisis, immense changes, right? The conditions of life changing swiftly. We're carried
Danger,
along.
danger.
We're propelled almost against our will and against our control. We have no means of measuring these things, and it's very swift what's happening. And now we have to begin to realize that force and strength, that there's a storm going on. There's a chaos going on. In much the same way that in Genesis 1:1, there's a chaos of the Tehom, the depths. But this storm is upon us, and where is the deity?
Nowhere.
He doesn't
It's all
exist.
about mankind has to be there.
Yeah, he doesn't exist. The deity doesn't exist. There is no God cradling humanity. Underneath are not the everlasting arms.
He says that right in the next paragraph about the changes that have come to this world have come through mankind himself.
Right.
Somewhere, there it is. The changes have come through men themselves. Quite a small number of people, heedless of the ultimate consequence of what they did, one man here, a group there, have made discoveries and produced and adopted inventions that have changed all the condition of social life. Man did it. All man. It was us.
Yeah.
We did it.
Yeah.
Screw the dogs. They didn't do anything.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep. And let me go back up here, because he says something really interesting to me before that. These changes have not come upon our world from without. No meteorite from outer space has struck our planet. There have been no overwhelming outbreaks of volcanic violence or strange epidemic diseases. The sun has not flared up to excessive heat or suddenly shrunken to plunge us into Arctic winter. The changes have come through men themselves. And what he's setting up there is the idea that we can control this. Like you said before, right? We can control. I mean, look at, nothing's happened in the last 100 years, in 18 or 1920, whatever. Nothing bad's happened. We've lived for 100 years. It's been pretty calm, and no meteorites, which is not true actually, because there were.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Is like, this is factually not true.
Tunguska, for instance, is a prime example. Nobody was around, but it was a massive explosion. No volcanoes, which also isn't true, because there was a massive volcano that caused the year without a summer.
The whole reason the Northeast got depopulated and they all went out west.
Yep.
Yeah.
No epidemic diseases, right? The sun has not flared up to excessive heat. That's actually not true either, because the sun was actually even then going through a solar maximum, and suddenly shrunk to plunge us into Arctic winter. No, there was a deep Arctic winter, which is not because of the sun, but because of the volcano. Anyway, my point being is that Wells is cherry picking events in order to show that we can actually control everything. The world, our lives, our future, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the way he does it is by showing nothing bad has happened except for what men have done, humans have done.
Yeah. Well, he's going to make a number of statements in the course of this book. When you look at it, he asserts it and then doesn't provide the slightest evidence that it's actually true.
He doesn't need to. It's the Bible.
Yeah.
It's the seminal work of a religion. And so it's axiomatic by its very nature, right? Every seminal work of a religion is axiomatic. I mean, look at Dianetics. What the hell does he prove in that book? Nothing, right? But that's the
drug-addled book.
Oh, totally drug-addled. But it's the seminal work for that group of loonies out there that Tom Cruise is part of. Sorry, Tom Cruise, if you're watching this.
You're a loony. You're a good actor, but you're a real nut job.
Yeah, I really loved how he acted there at the Olympics. That was an awesome performance. Anyway, so what about this quite a small number of people, heedless of the ultimate consequence of what they did, have made discoveries and produced? Again, he's setting things up, right? It's not the majority of humans that have discovered things. It's just a small elite number.
Have done it.
Yeah. Which is something that actually James Burke completely blew up when he wrote his book, Connections. Right?
Well, here's the funny thing, Will, is that in the sense of how I mean the words, it's true. It is a small number of people that have changed the course of history in so many ways. It has been a couple of people. I've been thinking about the great Viking and Danish invasions from the late 800s and 900s. That was the work of one family that
Yeah.
started. Sure.
Yeah.
It's nothing like what Wells is talking about here, though.
No, that's true. But Neil Oliver has pointed this out frequently, that these momentous changes that occur in human society frequently come from some guy just sitting around how to figure out to make a better fish hook. You
Yeah.
know, it's not these gigantic Renaissance characters that think big thoughts, Isaac Newton sitting under apple trees or something. It's actually ordinary people working through things and talking about things. And then they go to a Mr. Edison and they're like, "Hey, Mr. Edison, do you think this would work?" "Nah, this will never work. This sucks. Go back home and suck an egg." And then Mr. Edison goes and does it himself and makes money. So, but again, this is if I look at this as a Bible, as a seminal work, the axiomatic nature of it doesn't. I totally get it, because when you look at any other work that is seminal, whether it's the Bible, or whether it's the Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or whether it's the Quran, they make claims about how human beings ought to live and where we come from and what our job is. They don't have to back them up, because the point is not to do any kind of research or backing up of stuff. It's to frame the thinking, to frame the way that people think about themselves and about the world. And I think that's exactly what he's doing here.
Yeah.
It's a small number of people doing this.
Now that you put it in the terms of I should be thinking about this as the Bible, you'll find that in chapter 4, which is where he's talking about education, the very first phrases he put up there that I said, well, these are unsupported claims that he's putting up that really ought to be argued. Yeah, they're religious claims.
They're religious claims, totally religious claims. Yeah, totally religious. And again, I don't think the majority of people reading this, any more than the majority of people reading the Communist Manifesto, are going to see them as religious books, but they are. Both the Communist Manifesto and this, and probably a lot of other things like Steal This Book or Rules for Radicals, they're probably just basically, here's how the religion's going to unfold, Gosh. All right, let's move on.
Please do.
I get worked up about this stuff because I can see this is going to lead to the Balkan Canal project, or this is going to lead to the Chinese Great Leap Forward, and that just irks the hell out of me. So
yeah,
I'll read this.
As I have already gone through an incident of getting angry by a trigger word in the course of this broadcast, I know what you mean.
Yeah, right. We are now just beginning to realize the nature of these changes, to find words and phrases for them and put them down. First, they began to happen, and then we began to see that they were happening. And now we are beginning to see how these changes are connected together and to get the measure of their consequences. We are getting our minds so clear about them that soon we shall be able to demonstrate them and explain them to our children in our schools. We do not do so at present. We do not give our children a chance of discovering that they live in a world of universal change. Let me pause for just a minute.
All right, this isn't like
I
you.
gotta pause.
The phrase. Go ahead, please do.
I just pause for just a second. Okay, we're still going. I wanted to make sure it was still recording. Okay, we're good. Right. So yes, back to the share. You were saying.
I'm just saying that reading this is, again, it's just getting me absolutely infuriated. We don't give our children the chance of discovering they live in a world of universal change right there. Oh, you want to keep them inside a little prison to help form their mind so they'll figure it out? You meet some real children, send them out into the yard with a couple sticks. They learn how the world works like that.
Yep.
They learn what human alliances are like. They learn what a stick is like. They learn how they can jump and just how far off the wall they can jump before they break their leg.
Yep.
It's like he's talking about his idea of children and of humans, but it doesn't match what real humans are. And that really aggravates me.
He brings that up too in his critique of communism. He talks about how communist thought doesn't deal with real humans. It actually deals with straw man arguments over and over again, and this sort of this idea that humans are such and such when really they aren't. There's no what is the term? It's inductive reasoning rather than deductive reasoning. I think there's a lot to that. But again, let me run this back for a minute. Look how clever he is, Wells, because he is a great writer, but look how clever he is. We appeal to the children. It's for the children. We do this for the children, right?
You're right.
And
So
we do it. We do this. Who is this we? You got a frog in your pocket, you son of a bitch? Who's the we we're talking about? We're talking about anybody who agrees with the socialist principles. We're not talking about humanity, though it appears that way, as you said. It's not humanity. It's anybody who's agreeing that this is the right course of action. Middle-aged single women, for instance. Oh, it's such a nice idea. Gentle, soft-hearted men. Oh, yeah, we gotta look out for the kids. It's that kind of thing. It's like we are the ones who are on board with this, and if you're not on board, then you're against us. We have to do these things. But then the third thing that I find really interesting that he doesn't hear, he sneaks in a philosophic principle under the guise of doing something good for the children. And I find that really amazing and clever and absolutely disgusting. The philosophic principle is the nature of the world. What is the nature of the world? Is the nature of our existence in the world based upon principles that do not change? Or is the world and our experience of the world based upon constant change? This is Heraclitus, right? The only constant in life is change. Is that true? Or is the change simply an illusion based upon principles that are absolute? If it is constant change, then what you think is wrong is not wrong. It's just you have to modify your perspective. Or what is true now is different tomorrow because the party says so, right? Or what you thought was human anatomy is not human anatomy because now we know that human anatomy can be altered using science. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do see what you're saying, and I know where that one goes too. I
Yeah.
know people die,
Yeah.
you ruin their lives that way.
Yeah, you do. You do. But the philosophic principle is
Right,
one
though
that
I
goes way
hadn't
back.
noticed the fact that he meant something different by we than I meant by it. Because for all the people that aren't part of the group, somebody might come along and propose that they should just be exterminated.
Yeah.
And I believe somebody did.
I think that has been proposed several times by academics
And
and other
executed
types.
by some people. Execute.
Yep. I mean, we point to the Nazis or to the Khmer Rouge, but we also have who was that Jackson that taught there in the college and in the East Coast. So I lost that blighter's name, but he was of the opinion that the human race is a blight on the planet, needs to be exterminated. There are others that have suggested the same thing.
This is so annoying because I've actually met the guy. He was such
Yes, Peter Singer. Peter
Thank you.
Singer.
Thank you. Yes. No, I actually met him once upon a time. Him and
Fun.
who's the guy, population bomb guy. I met him.
Oh, yeah. Population bomb, yeah.
Well, I can't remember his name right now. He shares the same name as a guy that was a very nice guy that won the Nobel Prize, but it's really annoying me that I can't remember his name right now. I've met them both. They were so damned arrogant and unpleasant and expected everyone to treat them as servants.
Arrogance.
Paul Ehrlich, Paul R. Ehrlich, who is quite different from the other Paul Ehrlich. The other
Man.
Paul Ehrlich was the guy that figured out how to inoculate people against diseases and create antibodies to help treat you, and developed a cure for tuberculosis. And he was actually a very excellent and noble man. This Paul Ehrlich population bomb is the cure for the world is to make sure we exterminate people 1 billion at a time.
The cure for humans is to kill all the humans.
Yes, no man, no problem.
Dark, funny. Darkly funny. Yeah. Yeah. And to think about this idea of the we This is again everything for the party, nothing for the individual, you know, or everything for the motherland or whatever it is. I think it was I want to say the guy who wrote The Mechanical Bride, Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan, see, I haven't lost it.
Congratulations, you're doing better than I am.
Marshall McLuhan wrote, is either he or his disciple, Neil Postman, wrote about how when we advance into this mechanical world, we're actually going to devolve into tribalism. I think that was he. And I at the time I really didn't understand what he meant, and I get it now. Tribalism is this, it's this we. You are part of the tribe, or you are exterminated, exterminatable, expendable.
Really human if you're not
You're
part
not
of
really human. You're
Yeah.
part of the people, or you're not, you know, human. Yeah. And then the universal principle here, this goes way back for those who are paying attention. The discussion of whether things are universally changing or whether things are based upon an immutable thing. That's way back. Heraclitus discussed this back in the 5th century BC, talking about how the only constant in life is change. Everything's changing constantly. Now, he's refuted by others, for instance, not the least of which was Pythagoras, you know, the great mathematician. But Pythagoras's disciple, including one Plato, suggested that this whole world that changes is illusion based upon a constant that doesn't change. And then you get others who debated this in the 13th century, right? I think that this is in some ways based on the scholastic debate, because those who talked about the realist the real connection between this world and the principles of the universal talked about constant things. Things are constant, and we can rely on certain principles to do rational thought and conversation and writing and mathematical calculation, because it's actually based on a reality, the logos, that doesn't change. But those who said that it's all man-made, it's all created, they were the nominalists, because things based on name only. The nominalists basically said, no, it's changing constantly, and we can't rely on anything. Excuse me. Eleanor,
Huh?
could you go get my charger from upstairs? My battery is low. Thank you very much. So this goes back. This goes way, way back. We're talking easily 3,000 years, maybe more. This debate has gone on.
The philosophical conversations going on in modern world, like what is the political thing we should do, are so not new.
No, they're not new at all. They have very deep roots. Tolkien points this out in his writings, that what we're dealing with is something that's very, very, very old. It's not new. It just wears a new face and has a nice shine to it. But no, I think Wells is falling down very firmly on the side of the nominalists. But that makes sense considering the fact that thank you, my love, that he basically is dealing with a post Enlightenment world. A post-Enlightenment world where what he is proposing is basically Enlightenment ideals. So that makes sense to me. Still,
I can understand that. I just find it ironic that the fact that this is a discussion that has now been going on for longer than 2,000 years sort of indicates that we are not living in a world of universal change. It hasn't changed yet.
Yeah, it does. And it also indicates that these revolutionary new spankingly new awesome ideas are not. There's nothing original about you college student, liberal, communist piece of crap. Your ideas are not new. They're very old. So suck it up. Sorry, was that too harsh?
It's a little bit harsh, but it is correct too. I mean, you want to talk about an idea like anti-Semitism, for example.
Oh.
It doesn't begin with the Nazis. It's actually described in the book of Esther, going back to the Persian Empire, where they did the same thing that the Nazis did there.
Yep.
It's not a new idea, nor is much else.
No. Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh decided that was the solution to his problem with the Yids back in Egypt. Throw all the Yiddish people, their sons, throw them into the Nile. Have the alligators deal with them.
Yeah.
Plus que change, plus que même chose.
Or
all right.
There's nothing new under the sun. Yes, dude, by all means, go on with this.
Please do go on. What are the broad lines upon which these alterations of condition are proceeding? It will be most convenient to deal with them in the order in which they came to be realized and seen clearly, rather than by the order in which they came about or by their logical order. They are more or less interdependent changes. They overlap and interact. What do you have to, you have anything to say
Scroll up a
about that?
little higher, because
What's
as
that?
you go, scroll up a little higher so that I can start reading the next paragraph. Because again, this next paragraph, I feel begins to show you, if you think about it, that he's not talking about the same thing that you might be thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Before you do, just real quick on this last paragraph.
Yeah.
Let's go here. Okay, on this last paragraph, I just find it interesting again. If we look at this as a biblical work, and by biblical I mean book, Bible, seminal text for religion. If we look at this as a biblical work, his word use here, I would say is almost as clever as John's word use in the opening of John's gospel, because he moves from this idea of universal change, this principle that he puts forward for how the cosmos is created. And he moves immediately to say it's complex, it's highly complex, it's so complex that you little people can't figure it out. So let me show you.
Because they overlap and they interact.
Yeah, they do. It's like physics. You can't understand it, you peon. This is something that only the hierophants of the physics world can understand. The hierophants of the progressive movement, the experts, as they're called, can understand this, but you can't understand it. So shut up and listen, because you'll be told what to think.
Well, in fact, he does say that the experts didn't exist before really his time. He actually says this. Nobody understood it before. You know what? It's right there. It was only the beginning of the 20th century that people began to realize the real significance of that aspect of our changing conditions, to which the phrase, the abolition of distance, has been applied. Nobody before the 20th century ever understood that. I mean, Eratosthenes didn't actually determine how big the Earth was
No,
a couple hundred years before Christ was born. It never happened.
no.
But you know, he's saying that the truly educated and elite didn't begin until the start of the 20th century, which coincidentally would include him.
Yes. Isn't that ironic how that happens?
What a coincidence.
Hey, let me ask you. Look at this. Use of the passive voice,
Has been applied.
meaning who applied it. I mean, where do you get this phrase, the abolition of distance?
Yeah,
Do
that's
you
actually a
think,
good question. I actually don't know anyone who actually has
I don't
applied.
either, because it's a made up phrase. It's essentially the elite making a phrase that then they're going to impose on the people. It's the same thing that has happened recently. I mean, think about some of the phrases that we've been tossing around because we've been told to do so, right? Everything from intertextuality to inclusivity to, transsexualism. I mean, these are
What the
phrases
hell
that we
does that
didn't
mean?
used to use. We didn't used to use them, and they've
Yeah.
been foisted on us. And I wonder, this is just pure speculation. Do you think C.S. Lewis got his title from this?
The abolition of man.
Right.
It wouldn't shock me at all. I mean, God knows he hated Wells's work and he was familiar with it. So if he sees the abolition of distance, I can see his mind go all the way towards the abolition of man.
It is a very unique, oh, look, it is a very unique title. And I've always wondered about it. Now, certainly Lewis suggests that literally is where we're headed, is the abolition of human beings, of the idea, but also the reality of what a human is, a man. His book is published in 43. He refers back to several things that Wells has already brought up. I can't help but think that there's a direct connection.
It can't be a coincidence. You know he read what Wells wrote because he argues against it. So you know he read it. And he must
Really
have seen
interesting.
that phrase highlighted right here. And like you, asked the question, who says that? I don't know anybody who says that.
Yeah, right. And what Wells is saying is that this abolition of distance applies to the aspect of our changing conditions, right? The real significance is the abolition of distance. Okay. And Lewis goes on about the abolition of this, that, and the other thing, which really result in the abolition of man. I mean, he talks about how it's been touted that the condensing of distance, the condensing of time, the abolition of effort, all these things are really in order to get rid of what a human being is. So I honestly, I never thought about this until I just read this tonight. I think that's where he gets the phrase.
And I'm sitting here and I'm actually thinking about it because, of course, you and I literally are talking through technology that allows us to talk in real time, though we are separated by more than 1,000 miles right now.
Right.
But his contention is that this abolition of distance has changed the whole relationship of mankind towards each other and therefore changes what mankind is. It has produced a powerful revolution in the life of mankind. No, you and I still interact with our other fellow humans the same way as people
Yes.
did before. That
But
has
think about how,
changed.
but let me push back on that. Think about, on the one hand, how many people right now in Silicon Valley are suggesting that human beings are they are a failed species, and the better thing to do is to transfer our consciousness to a machine. Ray Kurzweil, for instance, and others. Transhumanism, of which Andrew Klavan has written a great deal at American Mind. Transhumanism, a phrase which we didn't used to use until the 1990s, has occurred because of this abolition of distance. It started an abolition of distance. It morphed into transhumanism. Even to some degree, as Klavan has pointed out, even to some degree, the transsexual movement is based on the transhumanist idea that the body itself is a morphable unit that should be transferred to a more durable unit like a machine. So in other words, Wells may inadvertently be onto something here. I mean, I think he's using the phrase in a certain way, which is to basically put a spell on people or to create a religion. But I think he's onto something, only in the sense that when we abolished distance, we began a course of thought that results in the abolition of human beings in the trans movement and the transhumanist movement. Maybe I should be more generous and say that Lewis really saw the implications in the abolition of man. Maybe that's more accurate.
Well, I think that Lewis sees, as frankly I see, that it doesn't stop once you have transitioned from man towards machine. The next stage is death.
You're pretty sure?
But Wells doesn't say that that's the next stage. His idea
No.
is that you get to a point where there's a harmonious utopia. I see you get to that point, and the very next thing that happens is everyone dies.
Yeah, and their whole point was to get to that utopia, but that utopia was
What
Auschwitz,
happens
wasn't it?
afterward? Yeah, yes. What happens after that? It's Auschwitz. That's the
Yeah,
end.
yeah. Yeah, and you had said that it doesn't change the way we relate to each other as humans. I think you're right on a real level. I think that's true. But look at what has happened in terms of the online culture, or look at what has happened in terms of the population just spiral, the death spiral that we've fallen into. Or look at what has happened in terms of people never leaving their homes. They just do their jobs from home constantly and have things delivered. These are radical changes, I think, in human culture and human interaction.
But they're not novel, Will. They are the same responses that humans have done towards loneliness all throughout the past. There have been many cases of societies where people began to isolate themselves. And there are societies that ceased to have children, and they are
Yes.
not with us anymore.
Yes, true. So maybe it's novel in the sense that it wasn't this way before the Fabians and the others started tinkering with the society, so to speak. But it is not novel in the sense that this is the symptom of the disease, and it has shown up prior in history because this is the way humans always respond.
Yeah, that is what I would say. Is what I would say, that we may be seeing it again, but it does not change the nature of mankind. It's the same response that has always happened before to these same actions.
I agree. Let's finish the rest of this paragraph so we hear a little bit more about the abolition of distance.
For a whole century before that, there had been continual increase in the speed and safety of travel and transport and the ease and swiftness with which messages could be transmitted. But this increase had not seemed to be a matter of primary importance. Various results of railway, steamship, and telegraph became manifest. Towns grew larger, spreading into the countryside. Once inaccessible lands became areas of rapid settlement, and cultivation. Industrial centers began to live on imported food. News from remote parts lost its time lag and tended to become contemporary, but no one hailed these things as being more than improvements in existing conditions. They are not observed to be the beginnings of a profound revolution in the life of mankind. The attention of young people was not drawn to them. No attempt was made or considered necessary to adapt political and social institutions to this creeping enlargement of scale.
He's totally wrong.
Yeah, I was going to say,
He's so wrong.
completely false.
He's so wrong. I mean, okay, I know we've said that there's no reason for him to back up his claims, but Wells is so fucking wrong. Okay, quick example, right? I delved into, as you know, the origins of Frank Herbert's concept in Dune of the revolution that occurs. So,
Something jihad.
yeah, the Butlerian Jihad.
Butlerian Jihad, thank you.
The Butlerian Jihad. And it goes back to a guy who's writing in the 1860s named Samuel Butler. And Samuel Butler at the time, he goes on to write works like Erewhon, for instance, and other things like that, which I look forward to reading. But Butler in 1860 is already talking about how machines are going to take over our lives. And we're going to see the extermination of human beings because machines will dominate. We have to now, in the 1860s, make a concerted effort to fight against the machines, even now. So in other words, even by 1860, people were already thinking about this, talking about it, being concerned with it, discussing it. So you take aside the whole, take for a minute, set aside the whole ideas of why towns grew up, for instance, during the Industrial Revolution and all that. Put that aside for a minute. People were already talking about it by the 1860s. You could probably go back and say people were talking about it as far back as, say, Voltaire and Candide, because he does talk about it to a certain degree. Or people were talking about it in Gulliver's Travels, because Jonathan Swift brings this up in his text. So Wells is just completely wrong in the idea that these things are not observed, right? And that they're not observed to be the beginnings of a profound revolution. They are. People are already talking about them and saying, this is profound. It's going to change us. We have to stop it. We have to do something to arrest this development. Boy, just wrong. But you don't have to be right because it's not an actual intellectual work. It's a Bible.
Did Cicero say something about stuff like this too, back in the Roman Empire?
O mores, o tempores.
I don't remember it. I can't remember the quotation right now. I'm just feeling fairly sure that there was also commentary about things like that 2,000 years ago. Yeah, he is historically. Also, I have to say that look, Neil Oliver had one of his excellent presentations on Genghis Khan that he just released. One of the things we have to remember is that guy actually did spend a good deal of his imagination thinking about how to deal with the scope of distance across the world and set up a frighteningly efficient bureaucratic system in order to allow the board to control it.
Okay, because I have to off-road to a certain degree. Do you know why tartar steak is called tartar steak or steak tartare?
I actually don't know where that comes from. I mean, I know who the Tartars are, but I don't know where the dish comes from.
Yeah. The Mongols, right? Moved very fast, riding their horses sometimes for 2-3 days at a time as they slept in the saddle, what have you, in order to cover that distance that we're talking about. And they therefore developed some of the first fast food in human history. Dried nuts, dried vegetables, dried meat, things like that. But they frequently would slaughter beasts as they traveled. They'd shoot them and then carve them up. And then instead of stopping to process that food, they would take these carved pieces of animal that they had shot in the saddle, and they would wrap them up in like cloth or paper and put them under their saddles as they rode. And for the next day, they'd be riding on this piece of raw meat that would then get pounded down as they rode up and down until it became soft enough to actually eat. And then they would eat it raw, but it was tender by that point. And that style of meat then somehow, I'm not sure how this happens, it came into vogue in the territories where the Mongols had been driven out, much like the croissant, I guess, was, when the Muslims after Lepanto. But it became vogue. And you would have people ordering this raw meat that had been tenderized and mixed with onion and maybe some sauce, and devouring it, called steak tartare, because they call the Mongols Tartars, which I thought was really kind of fascinating, and it has nothing to do with H.G. Wells. It's just kind of interesting as a side note.
You and I often fall off into side tangents, but I mean, for all I know, steak tartare was one of Wells's favorite dishes. So I frankly wouldn't know. I think it's
I think it's
disgusting, by the way. I hate it.
it's also necessary for me to go tangential, because when I'm reading this, I get so worked up that I find myself getting furious, and I don't want to do that. So
By the way, you know,
his
he makes the appeal to young people again at the very end.
yes,
So,
yes, young people, the young
yeah,
with their little red books, throwing out everything that was old.
we got to show young people what's necessary to adapt them to
Listen
political
to
and
the
social
children.
institutions. Let the
Listen to
children,
the
the young
children.
people, adapt to the creep
Yes,
large to scale because kids don't get that.
that's right.
So
But young people will definitely do what's right after they are taught by the hierophants of the queer movement, in libraries and stuff like that. They will definitely know what's right. Listen to their innocent hearts. I love that. That's wonderful. The attention of young people was not drawn to them. No attempt was made, but they are drawn to what's happening now by implication.
yes, because the wise have finally
Yes.
starts drawing their attention. Those who are um, good enough that didn't exist before the beginning of the 20th century.
And young people, wise people now realize that an attempt has to be made, in fact, is necessary to adapt political and social institutions to this burgeoning science
Mhm.
of the abolition of distance.
Yeah.
Brilliant. All right. Until the closing years of the 19th century, there was no recognition. And there he goes again.
Yeah,
Until the
yes.
closing years,
This is total bullshit. This whole sentence. It's, oh, it's just gonna try. Read it. Make yourself read it.
until the closing years of the 19th century, there was no recognition of the real state of affairs. Then a few observant people began, in a rather tentative commentary sort of way, to call attention to what was happening. What was happening? They did not seem to be moved by the idea that something had to be done about it. They merely remarked brightly and intelligently
Intelligently.
that it was going on. Who were those people, I wonder? Well, anyway. And then they went on to the realization that this abolition of distance was only one aspect of much more far reaching advances.
I
Yeah.
know. I know. If you know anything about what happened, too, it just drives you crazy that it's going that way. Oh,
Yeah, this few observant people. I'm assuming this is like Madison Grant, Edward Bellamy.
they're the first people to ever think about problems of distance.
They were
Yeah.
the first people to ever think about problems.
Yeah. Yeah. Not people like John Adams, for example, who was irrelevant towards observing this stuff. John Adams.
Well, that slave owner?
No, he wasn't a slave owner. That
Yes,
would
he
have been.
was.
No, he wasn't.
They all were. All those white people.
I'm pretty damn sure he was not. He's fairly
Oh, goodness
famous for not,
gracious.
actually, but I'm sure you can pull down his statue and call him a slave owner, but he definitely was not. Are you gonna tell me that William Wilberforce was a slave owner too?
Oh,
You know,
yes.
there's another thing. There's another name. He's a man that should be honored and
Oh,
revered,
yeah.
but
Totally.
nobody knows his name except
Why?
like you're. Yeah,
Why? It's because of this statement back up here, I gotta say, right?
because people like this
Yes.
drove his discussion of his life out of this world.
Well,
We would
isn't this
not think slavery was wrong if it wasn't for what Wilberforce did.
isn't this a blueprint for what is going to happen, right? This is the Bible. This is the seminal work. We need to give our children a chance of discovering that they live in a world of universal change. And so characters that show up who are honorable and noble and decent are and do affect tremendous change based upon universal constants, like every human being is a human. Those people need to be relegated to the sidelines.
Yeah,
It has to
until
be
it can
those.
all be reinvented.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. Because I mean, slavery was reinvented, right? Slavery didn't go away. Just
Oh, yeah.
overt slavery and overt slavery of people that was sold from the Congo area, that went away. But slavery is still around in another form. It's primarily around in financial slavery. Right. And who runs that?
Our noblest and wisest, I believe.
Yep. So
Yeah.
anyway, these few observant people. Yeah, they're few, right? I'm assuming it's the usual gang of idiots or the usual suspects, as they say in Casablanca.
The ones who think that they're the wisest.
Yep.
Of us all.
Well, certainly. I mean, they're definitely wise,
By the
intelligent.
way, I told you you'd find this interesting, but really, really aggravating.
It is aggravating. It's aggravating and it's risible. But again, seeing it as a seminal document, as the foundational document, it's extremely intriguing.
Yes.
It's like looking at the lingo that's tossed around now and it's just embedded in this sort of stuff, right? Such bright people, such intelligent people, the experts, right? All right. Men were traveling.
Traveling about so much faster and flashing their communications instantly about the world because a progressive conquest of force and substance was going on. Improved transport was only one of a number of portentous consequences of that conquest. Notice the military language here, by the way.
Yeah.
The first to be conspicuous and set men thinking, but not perhaps the first in importance. It dawned upon them that in the last 100 years, there'd been a stupendous progress in obtaining and utilizing mechanical power, a vast increase in the efficiency of mechanism, and associated with that, an enormous increase in the substances available for man's purposes, from vulcanized rubber to the modern steels, from petroleum and margarine to tungsten and aluminum. At first, the general intelligence was disposed to regard these things as lucky finds, happy chance discoveries. It was not apprehended that the shower of finds was systematic and continuous. Popular writers told about these things, but they told of them at first as wonders. Wonders like the pyramids, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the Great Wall of China. Few realized how much more they were than any wonders. The 7 wonders of the world left men free to go on living, toiling, marrying, and dying, as they had been accustomed to for immemorial ages. You'll have to scroll up for me to read further, but I hope you can see that he's about to say that these, by contrast to these modern wonders, have allowed us to get away from living, toiling, marrying, and dying. If the 7 wonders had vanished or been multiplied 60, it would not have changed the lives of any large proportion of human beings, but these new powers and substances were modifying and transforming, unobtrusively, surely, and relentlessly, very particular of the normal life of mankind. Yeah, renders you speechless for a second.
It does. I mean, just the sheer fucking hubris. There
Yeah,
are three things to point out here for me.
please.
Okay. The first thing is again just how wrong this man is in his history. Just
Yeah.
blatantly wrong.
He knows it though. That's why it so annoys me.
Yeah, I think he does.
He
I think he does.
absolutely knows this isn't what happened.
Right. But okay, this idea of an accident, accidentally coming across something and employing it rather than actively utilizing the thing. Okay. I read recently about how England is divided now into sort of a north and south, right? There's the Scotland and then there's the southern part, but it didn't used to be that way. It was divided actually into east and west because the western part was the source of major mines of tin and iron, if I'm not mistaken. And the tin mines especially were important because you couldn't find much of that in the rest of the world. And so all these areas in the west of England were dependent upon that trade, producing other things to supply the workers in the tin mines. And they exported their tin to all over the world, including the Middle East and Greece and Rome. And they fueled the Bronze Revolution because tin is a major component of bronze.
For those who are listening, by the way, just have to point out, you're not talking about modern England at all. It wasn't even called England at this point of time. It was Prydain. And this is before the English ever even remotely put foot on the island. It was doing this.
Yep.
But please,
this is as far back as about 2000 BC, right?
more.
Maybe more. Those tin mines, especially around Tintagel, especially around Tintagel, basically were not found by accident. They were found by experts who knew how to look for these veins of tin and knew how to organize mines and knew how to export the stuff. It was a major operation. And they fueled a revolution in human metallurgy, and a revolution in human society, therefore.
Mm-hmm.
So again, and that's one example, there are many. But this hubris of saying that these things used to be just accidental and you'd stumble on them and they didn't really know what they were doing. It's mind-boggling, truly mind-boggling. I mean, I guess I can account for it because of the hubris of the age of humans at the time in the late 19th and early 20th century. But it's just so massive a pride, a blindness to the reality of what the situation was. Put that aside. Okay, put that aside.
I'm not even going to give the answer to this, but I'm just going to give this as a question that allow people to think about these things. Chickens in 10,000 BC were in Southeast Asia. Why do you think that we have them so universally right now? I'm not going to answer that. People should think about that for a second.
Good one. That's a good one. That's a good one. The guy I'm reading now, Rodney Stark, who writes the book How the West Won and several other very good books, he points out that China came up with amazing inventions, but they didn't employ them because the emperor didn't want certain things employed. And so, for instance, the use of explosives. Explosives in China were never used for much more than fireworks, according to Stark, because the emperor was afraid that if they were turned into weapons, they'd be turned against him. So he could put a moratorium on the development of weapons using fireworks.
Ultimately, when the exact word used, but yeah, I can see the moratorium was put in for hundreds of years. Yeah,
but when they were exported to the West, lo and behold, what they do? Those blokes immediately began crafting cannons, for instance, and then later rifles. Or, I mean, blunderbusses and things like that. So again, it's not by accident that these things occurred. And it's just a complete misunderstanding of history on the part of Wells. So that being said, the second thing I'm noticing here, and I hadn't noticed this before. Notice he's mentioned men. Men did this and men did that and men did this and men did that. And this is going to sound odd coming from a guy who's generally a conservative, but where are the women? Where are the women in all of this?
Again, this is another case of I didn't get it until now. When I saw him reading men, I immediately thought mankind.
Humans. Right.
But what if that's not what he means?
I don't think that's what he means.
Guys with a
yeah, he means men that withdrew to a smoking parlor and discussed big ideas while the women went and did their little piddly things. That's what he meant. That's kind of startling.
You know what?
Misogynistic, startling.
See that idea. Now you've pointed it up. I've realized you're going to see that idea show up repeated throughout this book. That it is all about how men are going to protect this world. And actually,
I don't doubt it.
I don't see any point where he suggests women really are valuable at all.
Read Bellamy. When you read Bellamy's work, there's one female character. One.
In the whole world.
She dies, and she gets repeated in the future in one female character who's the carbon copy of that one female character from the past. There are no other women. It's all men. It's really quite startling when you notice it. So I don't normally give much credence to feminist philosophy or feminist readings of things or feminist history, but history is loaded with women. There are lots of women in history, and there are lots of women who did spectacular things.
Yeah.
Where are they?
Well,
not in here.
Not here.
And
You
and this
definitely
is,
think they're important.
and to make this more significant, let's go back to this idea that this is a biblical work. This is a seminal work. We've talked about the creation. We've talked about the situation at the beginning. It's chaos. It's a storm that's come upon us. We've talked about how mankind is going to save himself, not the deity. Now, what are we looking at? I think we're looking at the creation of Eve. And what I mean by that is he's now got us into a position where man is going to take charge of his own life. And who is going to be his helpmate?
Man will make him.
This is going to be his helpmate. It's going to be these great works of machinery that he's going to create. Machines are going to be the
A
helpmate.
staple of dystopian fiction that women get replaced by machines.
And I hate to say it, it's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening. It dawned upon them that in the last 100 years, there had been a stupendous progress in obtaining and utilizing mechanical power. Oof. All that mechanical power, baby. The efficiency of mechanism. It's going to drive males into the future, into the stars, baby. We're going to go to the stars with our Eve. Did you ever see the movie Deus? I think it's called Ex Machina.
Yes,
Deus
I
Ex
did
Machina.
actually. I found it a chilling movie.
It was a good one, really good
Yes.
one. I thought that
Oh,
guy was the guy that went on to do the most recent Joker movie. I think.
oh, did he?
I think that's the same fellow, the Joker Folie do or whatever. But anyway, how much more of this crap do we have to read?
Well, there's
Good
quite a
Lord.
bit more of it. I'm going to be honest. There's going to come a point you're not going to be able to take it anymore. But I hope that what we've gone through so far has given both you and anyone else that listens to this an idea of this great philosophy that the progressives, that the Fabian socialists who call themselves by a different name, but by God, they're still there. The ideas that
Yeah.
think tanks are promulgating are these ideas right here.
I hope nobody watching this comes away thinking, wow, this sounds great.
I
But
hope
or even
so.
if they do, at least realize that what we're looking at is not a rational work in the sense of really analyzing history. It's a biblical work. I really think this is a seminal work.
Definitely a screed
Yeah.
is there.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
it's
agreed.
better written than Marxist Communist Manifesto, I do have to say.
It is.
Yeah.
It's H.G.Wells, so it's better written.
Yeah.
Okay, so he says there are still other changes outside. So that's a good like cutoff point. So let's do this last paragraph and then cut it off. We'll do some more later. Okay.
Sure.
They increased the amount.
I told you.
Talk about a male dominated society. It's all about increase and swelling of production. They increased the amount of production and the methods of production. They made, who's the they?
Yes, who is that, I wonder?
Who's he referring to?
Always a good question. These, however, would be, I believe, the people that finally realized that, unless he's not talking about the people from the previous paragraph, the ones who realized the great changes that could improve the world.
Yeah.
Maybe he's talking about a different group of people now.
Is the they the wise people that recognize certain things? These few observant people? Is that what the they? Let's assume that's whom he's talking about. He's talking about these few observant people.
Because when I first read this, I didn't actually think it was the same group. I thought it was a different group that was opposed to the good of people. But maybe this is the wise people and this is a good thing.
Okay, well, let's look. They increased the amount of production and the methods of production. They made possible big business to drive the small producer and the small distributor out of the market. They swept away factories and evoked new ones. They changed the face of the fields. They brought into the normal life, thing by thing and day by day, electric light and heating, bright cities at night, better aeration, new types of clothing, and on the seventh day, a fresh cleanliness. Oh, sorry. That's my
When
thing.
I first read this, I was thinking that he was saying this is a bad thing. Now I'm looking at it, he's totally in favor of this.
I think this is the creation bit.
Yes, they created all these things.
Yeah, this is Genesis 1:1 again. They changed a world where they had never been enough, where there had never been enough into a world of potential plenty and a world of excessive plenty. It dawned upon
It dawned. It dawned, by the way, a new day on the next day.
It dawned upon their minds after their realization of the abolition of distance that shortage of supplier had also been abolished, and that irksome toil was no longer necessary to produce everything material that man might require. It is only in the last dozen years that this broader and profounder fact has come through to the intelligence of any considerable number of people. Most of them have still to carry their realization a step farther and see how complete is the revolution in the character of the daily life these things involve.
And just remind everyone that he's writing this a few years after the carnage of the First World War and a few years before the rise of the Nazis, to carry their realization a step further and see how complete is the revolution in the character of daily life.
Yeah. Yeah, which one looks at as either accidental things, stuff happens, war and all that.
How can you not think about the carnage of the First World War when you lived it? How?
Or you don't include it in your text because that's not a part of the religion.
Sure, you pretend
In other
it
words,
happened.
in other words, recall that in order to have what Wells and others like Bellamy propose, we have to greatly reduce the population.
Well, the First World War worked for that.
Yeah, I mean, what happened to the PALS societies, right? The PALS troops. You know about them, right?
Remind me on this one.
Basically, in England, England decided that they were going to organize their army not based upon an arbitrary number or whatever, but based upon people that grew up in the same town. They could fight together. So people that lived together could fight together, and they were called PALS groups, and PALS based upon rowing societies or philately societies or people that had grown up in Sheffield or whatever, and so they all went off to the front, and they all got wiped out.
Yes,
and so an entire village lost all of its men, like all of them, between the ages of 17 and 45. They were wiped out. Villages without men, so much so that women joining convents after World War I doubled in size because there were no men.
Yeah.
That's a very effective way of reducing the population, I would think. Yes.
Yes, it is. And it's only in the last dozen years this broader, profounder fact came through to the intelligence of any considerable number of people.
Yeah, right.
It's bitter when you look at that
sentence.
Very. It's context of the knowledge, you're talking about wiping out a whole generation of people in a couple of years.
I sometimes wonder whether people like Stalin, who joked about this, the cracking of eggs and making an omelet, or the death of one man tragedy, and a 40 million is a statistic. I wonder if he wasn't in some ways critiquing in a cynical way or in a comic way this very principle. I know Stalin was a bastard. I got it, and what he said is horrifying. But I can see a sick son of a biscuit like him joking about a principle that had been raised among the Fabians, which I think is what we're looking at.
I'm laughing as he did it. Yes.
Yeah, right. But let me change gears here for just a sec. Do you agree that this section here corresponds, on the one hand, to the idea of creation that appears in Genesis, and on the other hand, to the idea of be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and be gardeners of the earth?
Yes, you're absolutely looking about the dawn of the new world is created here.
Yeah.
Created by a few bright men.
Yep. They,
which is not us.
No, we are the PAL Society. And also the idea here, that if the they is Adam, the Eve that helps Adam is machines, mechanized labor.
Because you could not have given birth to the modern world without machines.
No, you couldn't. You couldn't. That machine is straight out of your own rib. Gosh, I thought this would be exciting to read. I did not think it would be this exciting. It is breathtaking to read this shit.
Yeah,
It really is.
See the connections there. I find it again, like anytime I try and read anything by Bellamy, I find myself feeling increasingly dirty. As it
Yes.
this,
Yes,
though.
absolutely. Dirty and a little queasy and a little bit like, I'm peering into Sauron. I'm peering into, Mordor.
Yeah.
Um,
And made so much clearer for me because I know what happened with the people that put this into action. And I know there still are people trying to put this into action now, despite everything that happened.
yes, well, God willing, they won't succeed. So at least for a spell, that's what Tolkien suggested was,
Yeah,
these things go away and then they come back and then we have to fight them again. So
that's the darkest of the time.
as Frodo said, I wish these things hadn't happened in my time, right? But
All who live to
yep,
see such times.
that's right. Ours is not to decide that. Ours is to decide what we're going to do with the time given to us. Very much aware of the power of words and images, and very much aware that there are spiritual entities attached to these things. I'm going to suggest that we call it quits for tonight, that we say a little prayer and then just stop, because this is quite sufficient demonology for one night, don't you think?
I've had enough, yes. But it really has been a pleasure
I've
going
had enough
through
Wells.
I mean, I was glad to have read this once. I'm glad to be going through it with you, and bringing to light some of these things that what's really being said here.
Yes.
But
Yes.
yeah, I've had enough of Wells.
All right. Well, let's call it quits for tonight. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray.
Do
Do
thou,
thou, Prince, the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all evil spirits that prowl about the world, seeking the ransom of souls. Amen.
grace of our
All
Lord
right,
Jesus Christ,
my
love.
brother, thank you so much. It's been really, really good. Glad to talk with you. We'll do it again, hopefully next week.
I'm free next week.
All
Yeah.
right, sounds good. All right,
Love
take
you.
care. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye.